Greetings, everyone. I embody the eerie. I'm here to assist you today. If you enjoy using this video to drift off to sleep, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel before you doze off. What's your location, and what time are you tuning in right now? Take a moment to unwind and enjoy the calm. The leaves whispered beneath my boots, the soul sound piercing the haunting stillness of the forest. After hours of walking, the weight of reality was gradually settling into my consciousness. I found myself utterly adrift. As the sun dipped below the treetops, casting elongated shadows across the forest floor, an exhilarating shiver coursed through me. In that moment, I caught sight of it, a distant, flickering glow. A battle of hope and fear surged within me as I moved closer to the light. My pride for Colorado ran deep, shaped by countless weekends spent exploring the majestic Rocky Mountains with my father. However, this solo journey to the Adirondacks felt distinct. The terrain was uncharted, and I had foolishly overlooked the ominous signs of an approaching storm. The day began flawlessly, with clear skies, a soft breeze, and the allure of adventure sweeping me off my feet. Deeper into the wilderness than I had intended, I became so captivated by the stunning beauty around me that I failed to notice the subtle shift in the weather. As the initial raindrops began to descend, I found myself far from the designated path. As I attempted to retrace my steps, the relentless rain had washed away any remnants I could have possibly left behind. The trees stretched endlessly in every direction, a vast ocean of green and brown, as a wave of panic washed over me. I committed the classic blunder of every disoriented hiker. I started to rush, each frantic step taking me further from safety. As the darkness enveloped the surroundings, that faint and far-off glow became my sole beacon of hope. I navigated the dense underbrush, brushing aside the sharp branches and the muck clinging to my boots. The light grew brighter, revealing the flicker of what I hoped was a campfire. As I approached, I eased off the pace slightly. The camp had an unsettling aura. If this was it, the silence was almost deafening. Silence enveloped the scene, broken only by the crackling flames and the sporadic clink of metal, with no voices or footsteps to disturb the stillness. I huddled behind the sturdy trunk of a massive oak, my heart racing as I stole a glance at the scene before me. What I witnessed sent chills down my spine. It was unlike any camp I had ever encountered. Previously observed, 3 expansive tents created a semicircle encircling a crackling campfire. These were not the vibrant nylon tents typically seen on hiking trails. Instead, they were military-grade structures shrouded in camouflage nets. I noticed a collection of stacked boxes, a few ajar, showcasing the shimmering metal within. I found my thoughts drifting to this place. Who would establish a camp in such an isolated location? I was taken aback. As they acclimated to the low light, I caught a glimpse of movement. A man emerged from one of the tents, a rifle casually slung over his shoulder, followed closely by 2 others. I observed a total of 5 individuals, each armed and exhibiting the precise movements typical of military training. I understood the need to retreat gradually while sprinting with all my might, yet the pull of curiosity and desperation held me firmly in position. These men may pose a threat, yet they also have the potential to be perilous. As I weighed my options for escaping the forest, a sudden gust of wind swept through, bringing their voices to my ears. "The shipment is growling," one of the men remarked. "If they don't show up within the next hour, we'll shift gears to Plan B." "Take it easy," another responded. "They understand the repercussions of destroying us. They will arrive, bringing risks with them." The emptiness in my stomach deepened. Whatever is happening here is stumbling upon something illegal and potentially deadly. I instinctively began to retreat, focusing on controlling my breath and moving as quietly as possible. But in my haste, I miscalculated where to place my foot. A dry branch creaked under my boot, the sound piercing the stillness of the forest like a gunshot. The men in the camp froze, then, with rehearsed efficiency, scattered, rifles at the ready. I didn't wait to see more. I turned and ran, pushing through the undergrowth, abandoning all thoughts of stealth. Behind me, I heard screams and the thunder of boots in pursuit. My heart raced as I navigated the dark forest, branches slapping my face, roots threatening to trip me at every turn. Fear propelled me forward. I had no idea where I was headed, only that I needed to put as much distance as possible between myself and those men. A shot rang out. He whistled by my ear and struck the bark of a tree just inches from my head, the stark realization hitting me that they were firing shots. With adrenaline coursing through my veins, I darted through the trees, skillfully navigating the forest for the best cover I could find. The duration of my run was a mystery. In the frenzy of the pursuit, time faded into oblivion. My lungs were on fire, my legs weighed a ton, yet I pushed through. The sounds of the pursuit started to dwindle, leaving me uncertain whether I was genuinely losing them or if they were simply adopting a more careful strategy. At last, just when I thought I could go no further, my eyes caught sight of a hollow at the foot of a massive ancient tree. I plunged in without a second thought, immersing myself in the shadows. I pressed my hand against my mouth, attempting to stifle the sound of my uneven breathing. Time dragged on endlessly as I crouched in that hollow. Each rustle of leaves sent fresh waves of terror coursing through me. Twice, I caught glimpses of lanterns' haunts drawing near my hiding spot, and with each encounter, I was certain my cover would be blown. Yet, against all odds, they managed to overlook me. As the night deepened and the echoes of the search faded into the distance, I remained still. Fear and fatigue held me captive. At some moment, I must have drifted off, for the next thing I realized was the gentle sunlight streaming through the leaves. With great care, I emerged from my concealed spot, each muscle in my body voicing its discontent at the effort. The forest was now alive with sound, a stark contrast to the heavy silence of the previous night. The melodic chirping of birds filled the air, while small creatures darted through the underbrush, creating a symphony of nature that I had never imagined could exist. Your support would mean the world to me. In that moment, I found myself disoriented, famished, and drained, yet I was still alive. As the daylight broke through, illuminating my surroundings, clarity began to return. Drawing on my fundamental survival training, I sought out higher ground. The quest for landmarks consumed nearly an entire day, yet I ultimately discovered a trail. The journey back to civilization was a grueling and arduous trek. When I finally discovered a ranger station, I must have appeared like a true wildling. The rangers, though startled, showed great kindness. They provided me with food, water, and medical attention for my cuts and bruises. I shared the entire story of how I got lost, the camp I stumbled upon, and the relentless pursuit that followed me through the night. My statement was taken seriously, leading to immediate calls to the state police and even the FBI in the days that followed. I discovered that I had uncovered a significant gun trafficking operation. After months of relentless pursuit, the authorities were finally on the verge of cracking the case. My unexpected discovery provided the crucial lead they had been searching for to bring the group down for good. Though years have slipped by since that fateful night in the woods, the nightmares linger on. The echo of gunshots, the thud of boots closing in, the chilling awareness that each breath might be my final one. I continue to embrace hiking and my passion for the outdoors, but I've become significantly more cautious in my adventures. I persist relentlessly. I make it a point to inform someone of my whereabouts and my expected return. Yet, there are moments in the woods, as daylight wanes, when I find myself scanning the trees, half hoping to catch a glimpse of a distant, misleading glow of a campfire that offers no warmth or welcome. The sound of my tent closing echoed sharply in the quiet of the night. I paused in secco, my hand lingering midway. The sound stirred my senses, a rustle of branches, a whisper of leaves. Something was lurking beyond my camp, and it was clear that whatever it wasn't merely a curious raccoon. I've always had a deep affection for camping. It offers a unique tranquility that is truly unmatched. When you find yourself immersed in the embrace of nature, far away from the hustle and bustle of civilization, or at least that was my belief back then, as I find myself resting in my sack as I lay there, heart racing, I found myself rethinking my views on solitude. The day had unfolded like any other solo camping adventure, with me hiking deep into the Ozark, soaking in the vibrant green canopy and the unidentifiable melodies of birds. By afternoon, I discovered the ideal spot for my camp, a quaint clearing beside a gentle stream, sheltered by majestic oaks. While I set up my tent and gathered firewood, a familiar wave of contentment washed over me. This was my sanctuary, far removed from the clamor and pressures of urban life. I prepared a simple meal over the crackling campfire, mesmerized by the sunset's brilliant hues of orange and pink. Yet, as darkness enveloped the landscape, an unsettling feeling began to seep in, perhaps triggered by the sudden stillness of the wind. An unsettling quiet enveloped the surroundings, or maybe it was the peculiar noise that pierced the air just as I extinguished the campfire. It wasn't quite a wolf's howl, nor was it the shriek of a coyote, but something that lingered in between. I attempted to brush it aside, convincing myself that my imagination was simply getting the best of me. I slipped into my tent, securing the entrance as if that delicate layer of nylon could shield me from any lurking dangers in the wood's sleep. It arrived sporadically, filled with disjointed visions of elusive silhouettes and luminous gazes. Now, in the profound darkness of night, those dreams appeared to materialize in reality, another fissure forming. This time, my breath caught in my throat. Amidst it all, it was becoming increasingly audacious. With a sense of urgency, I slowed down to assess the situation. I moved quietly, extending my hand to retrieve my flashlight, ready to illuminate the unknown. The brilliant beam cut through the shadows as I aimed it at Maya's store window. For an instant, I recognized the familiar silhouettes of trees and underbrush. Then a sudden flicker of motion caught my eye at the clearing's edge. A figure loomed before me. It possessed a human shape, yet something was undeniably amiss, too elongated, too slender. Its proportions were unsettlingly skewed, sending chills down my spine. It stared directly at me, blinking, and I tried to convince myself it was merely an illusion. But when I opened my eyes once more, the figure remained, unmoving, fixated on me. The urge to survive surged within me, and the concept triumphed. I emerged from my sleeping bag, wrestling with the tent's zipper. A part of me recognized the irrationality of my actions. Charging into the dark woods felt like the worst decision I could make. Yet, fear doesn't operate on logic, and in that moment, my sole focus was to create as much distance as I could from that source of terror. I leaped from the tent, my bare feet meeting the chill of the ground. I dashed forward, branches slashing at my face, their menacing reach eager to trip me up. With each step I took, I could hear the rustling behind me. Something was navigating the thick underbrush, pursuing me relentlessly. My lungs were on fire as I pushed myself to run faster, while a nagging voice in my head shouted that I was utterly lost, that I had no clue where I was headed. I brushed it aside. My only focus was on escaping. Then, without warning, the ground vanished beneath me. I plummeted, tumbling down a steep incline, and the pain surged through me. As I landed at the bottom of the drop, a rush of air escaped my lungs in an instant. Dazed and breathless, I stood there, jolted back to reality by the sound of approaching footsteps. I searched desperately, scanning my surroundings for a hiding spot. A hollow log caught my attention just a few meters away. Though it wasn't substantial, it was the only choice I had, pushing aside the discomfort. I slipped inside, feeling myself shrink in the presence before me. They were barefoot, ghostly in the moonlight, with fingers elongated and sharp. My heart raced, pounding so fiercely I thought it might echo in the silence. For a moment, their feet remained motionless, then began to sway slowly, back and forth. I held my breath, pleading with whatever lurked nearby not to discover my hiding place, as time stretched on endlessly. The footsteps faded, slipping away from my sight. I found no comfort in their presence. I shifted my position, remaining still within the trunk, every muscle coiled tight. Hours slipped by as the sky brightened with the first hints of dawn. At last, I permitted myself a moment of ease outside. sensing that whatever had been there was now absent. I crept out of the trunk, moving as quietly as I could. As I stood up and surveyed my surroundings, I realized I was in a small ravine, encircled by thick forest. Confusion set in. I had no clue which way to go. The thought of returning to my camp felt daunting in the daylight. A flicker of reason urged me to escape, but first I needed to orient myself. I began to ascend the nearest hill, using tree roots for support. Each movement sent pain coursing through me, but the fear of being trapped there propelled me forward. I pushed myself to the summit, pausing to regain my breath. In that moment, I spotted a clearing among the trees ahead, a glimmer of light bouncing off metal a road. Hope surged within me. I finally had a direction, a target to aim for. I made my way to the road, ensuring I kept it in view at all times. The journey was challenging, the woods were dense, and the terrain was rugged. There were moments when I lost track of my landmark, and a wave of panic loomed over me. Yet, each time, I paused, took a deep breath, and regained my focus. The quest for fear continued to twist my stomach, as my thoughts relentlessly returned to the haunting images from the previous night. In the bright light of day, the notion of a tall, slender, otherworldly being appeared utterly ridiculous. Indeed, it may have been a person, perhaps a hunter or a transient dwelling in the woods, but the peculiar movements and unnatural proportions could easily have been an illusion cast by the shadows. Fear and darkness twisted my imagination. Yet, the image of those feet lingered, those unusually elongated toes, sharply pointed, and once again, uncertainty crept into my thoughts. After nearly an entire day, I finally emerged from the woods. The highway stretched out before me, and as the cars whizzed past, I felt an overwhelming surge of emotion, nearly bringing me to tears. It was undoubtedly a harrowing scene, barefoot, clothes in shambles, dirt and scratches all over, but none of that mattered. What counted was that I was safe, and so was the truck driver. He paused and extended an invitation to drive me to the next town. I eagerly accepted. A sequence of calls to the police followed, reporting the incident while leaving out the oddest details for my family, assuring them I was fine, and arranging for a friend to pick me up the next day. I attempted to make sense of the experience. Perhaps I had glimpsed a bear rearing up, or maybe it was merely a strikingly vivid nightmare fueled by an abundance of horror tales and a wild imagination. Yet, beneath it all, I understood the reality. What I encountered in that forest defied logical explanation. It was genuine, and I had been pursuing my own shadow. Since that night, I haven't camped again. My tent and sleeping bag sit untouched in a closet, a reminder of a cherished hobby that has slipped away. On quiet nights, when the wind rustles through the trees, I find myself listening for the sound of tents, unknowingly longing for the experience, waiting for a moment that feels just out of reach. Listen closely to the rustling of a branch or the whisper of leaves, and sometimes in my dreams, I find myself back in that forest, running, always running, with the certainty that if I dare to glance back, I will see that figure again, tall and thin, watching me with eyes that gleam with an unsettling intelligence. Awaking from those dreams, drenched in cold sweat, my heart racing, I try to steady my breath. Yet, a part of me wonders, if I opened my eyes and found her standing at the foot of my bed, gazing at me while I sleep, would I truly be surprised? The truth is, once you've glimpsed something like this, the veil between our world and what lies beyond is forever lifted, even if just for a moment. You are left with the undeniable knowledge that sometimes, when you are alone in nature, you are not alone at all. The glow of my phone screen illuminated the dim living room as I examined the replies regarding my well-maintained 2005 Honda Civic. I have to sell it. I was in need of cash, and a prompt response piqued my interest. A person named Mike. Mike was eager to schedule a test drive. Unbeknownst to me, that message would lead me into a nightmare. I had never considered the risks of meeting strangers online, but desperation can cloud one's judgment. With my rent about to expire, the extra cash from selling my old car felt like a lifeline. When Mike proposed that we gather in a serene park on the outskirts of town, I set aside my doubts and embraced the opportunity. The day of the meeting arrived, bright and clear. I gave the Civic a quick wash, hoping the gleaming blue paint would help seal the deal as I drove to the meeting point, rehearsing my sales pitch in my mind. Low mileage, regular oil changes, exceptional gas mileage. So focused on the sale, I hardly noticed how the houses became fewer and the road narrowed as I approached the park. I parked in the small gravel lot, caught my eye as I glanced at my watch 10 minutes early. Just perfect. I stepped out of the car and leaned against it, attempting to appear at ease while I surveyed the park. It was quieter than I had anticipated, with only the gentle rustling of leaves and the distant melodies of birds punctuating the stillness. Moments later, a sleek black Subaru rolled into view. A tall man stepped out of the vehicle, likely in his 30s, sporting short hair and a warm, inviting smile. He approached, extending his hand with a welcoming gesture. "Hello, you must be Alex. My name is Mike." We exchanged a firm handshake, and I dove right into my polished presentation about the car. Mike nodded, inquiring about mileage and maintenance with keen interest, and gradually began to ease into the conversation. Perhaps I had been overly cautious without justification. "It doesn't matter if we give it a shot," Mike said, pointing towards the road. "Absolutely," I responded, tossing him the keys with ease. "Discover a charming circuit that winds around the lake, perfect for your next adventure." As Mike settled into the driver's seat, I took my place on the passenger side, and we smoothly rolled out of the parking lot. I observed that he was sporting out-of-state license plates. Just as I was about to inquire about his origins, he suddenly accelerated, tires screeching against the pavement. "Whoa, take it easy," I replied with a nervous chuckle. "It's not just a race car." Mike remained silent, his gaze locked on the road ahead, his knuckles pale against the steering wheel. The speedometer surged from 60 to 70, while the trees whizzed past in a vibrant green blur. "Honestly, my friend, take it easy," I urged, as my heart began to race. "You're not about to," he turned to face me, and the warmth of his smile had vanished. Instead, a presence that is icy and methodical emerged. A heavy dread settled in my chest as the realization of my grave mistake washed over me. "You're staying right here," Mike mentioned with a low, menacing tone. I reached for the door handle, but he jerked the steering wheel, sending me crashing against the window. Stars burst in my vision as my head struck the glass. By the time I regained my senses, we were navigating a dirt road I didn't recognize. "Just take the car, Balbu. I won't call the police, I promise. Just let me out here." Mike's laughter erupted, a harsh sound that unexpectedly made me chuckle. It sent a shiver down my spine. "Oh, this gift isn't for the car, Alex. It's meant for you." Thoughts were swirling in my head as I struggled to grasp the situation unfolding before me. I recognized this individual. I had inadvertently affected him in some way, yet I was certain I had never encountered him prior to that moment. The dirt road culminated in a spacious clearing, where an aged barn, its once vibrant red paint now faded and peeling, stood at one end. Mike halted the car and faced me, drawing a gun from his waistband. "Sal, place the order, and keep it together, no foolish moves with those shaky legs." I stepped out of the car, and before I knew it, Mike shoved me into the barn, the cold metal of the gun digging into my back. As we approached, I started to pick up on faint sounds emanating from within. A chill ran through me as I recognized the haunting sounds of human voices, filled with cries and moans. As Mike thrust me through the barn door, the scent enveloped me instantly, a potent mix of sweat, blood, and palpable fear. As my eyes acclimated to the dim light, I spotted them no fewer than a dozen individuals, men and women of various ages, all restrained and silenced. There was nobody else around. His eyes grew wide with fear at the mere sight of me. He increased his count of prisoners once again. "Step into your exciting new journey." Alex remarked that Mike possessed a smile that was decidedly cruel. "Get ready to roll up your sleeves, because there's going to be plenty of hands-on work ahead." He forcefully shoved me to the ground and secured my hands behind my back. The truth of my circumstances struck me with the force of a punch to the gut. This was no ordinary robbery. In the car, I uncovered a far more grave scenario, a human trafficking network. In the hours that followed, I was swept away by a storm of fear and confusion. As additional men gathered, they engaged in hushed discussions with Mike regarding the shipments of buyers, each utterance deepening the dread of the unfolding events. As darkness descended, they started to pack us into a massive truck, cramming us together like livestock, the heavy atmosphere thick with the scent of dread. I focused on remaining composed, searching for an escape route, yet anxiety overwhelmed my mind. The engine roared to life, and we began our journey through a narrow gap in the truck's panel. I caught fleeting glimpses of the outside world, first trees, then buildings, and finally an open highway. We were departing the city. I found myself completely unaware. Time slipped away as I observed the scene. Individuals were weeping quietly or remaining frozen in disbelief. I strained my wrists against the rope, sensing its bite against my skin. If only I could escape this confinement. So, what's the plan? Leap off a moving truck? Surviving the fall was just the beginning. I was utterly lost in this unfamiliar place. In an instant, the truck veered violently, and I crashed into the wall, a searing pain erupting in my shoulder. Amidst the piercing sound of tires screeching, we caught the echoes of screams. Suddenly, we came to a stop, sending us all crashing to the ground. In an instant, silence enveloped us, only to be shattered as the back of the truck exploded open, unleashing a blinding light that cleaved through the darkness. With my eyes shut, I could make out the outline of armed figures as they approached the police truck. Everyone remained composed. A sense of relief washed over me like a tidal wave. In an astonishing twist of fate, they had tracked us down. An officer severed the bindings from my wrists. The full impact of my recent experiences crashed down on me. I started to cry uncontrollably. The days that followed unfolded in a chaotic flurry of police statements, medical examinations, and heartfelt conversations with my family, who were filled with fear. I found out that the police had been monitoring this trafficking network for months. My meeting with Mike had guided them straight to the heart of the operation. Mike, known in real life as Eric Lawson, found himself in handcuffs alongside a group of accomplices. The park where we first crossed paths was a frequent target for his unsuspecting victims. They leveraged online marketplaces to entice individuals to remote locations, banking on the allure of a great deal to lower their defenses. In my living room, I found myself fixated on the for sale sign propped against my aging Civic in the driveway, a haunting reminder of how near I was to vanishing completely. The car I intended to sell nearly drove me to my wits' end. The price I paid was my very existence. The weeks that followed were incredibly challenging. I dedicated myself to therapy and support groups for those who have survived trafficking attempts. Step by step, I started to find my way to healing. I discovered how to trust once more, to view strangers without suspicion. Yet I also recognized the importance of trust your instincts and heed that quiet voice within you saying, "This is not okay." I'm still holding onto my Civic. I'm unable to bring myself to sell it. It serves as a poignant reminder of the swift nature of life's transformations, illustrating how a single choice can lead you down an entirely new path. On an unexpected journey, every time I take the wheel, I'm reminded of my freedom and the importance of cherishing it. As I cruise down a desolate road, I often spot a car pulled over, someone inspecting the hood or checking a tire. In those fleeting moments, I'm transported back to that park, recalling a stranger with a friendly smile but ulterior motives. I silently pray for those who haven't been as fortunate as I have, vowing to remain vigilant and aware. The reality is that danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives with a smile and a tempting offer. The line between safety and unimaginable horror can be as thin as choosing the right place for a test drive with someone you don't know. The convenience store's neon sign flickered brightly against the night sky. As I entered the parking lot, a solitary headlight cast its glow on the vacant area. A heavy fatigue blurred my sight, leaving me feeling hollow. Little did I know that this stop would change everything. Had I been aware of the treasures that lay ahead, I would have pushed through the fatigue and kept driving. The bell above the door chimed sharply, breaking the stillness of the quiet store. The fluorescent lights hummed above, bathing the aisles in a harsh, uninviting glow that illuminated shelves brimming with an array of snacks and sugary beverages. At the counter, an elderly man dozed peacefully in a chair, his chin gently resting on his chest. "Excuse me," I spoke in a hoarse voice, worn from disuse. "Greetings," the elderly gentleman remarked, blinking as he regarded me with a distant gaze. In an instant, a flicker of fear flashed in his eyes, quickly replaced by a hollow smile. "Welcome to Joe," he said, his voice gravelly and tough. "How may I assist you today?" I enjoyed a coffee and some snacks, engaging in a bit of light conversation as I settled the bill. As I began to walk away, his grip tightened around my wrist with unexpected strength. "Stay safe out there," he murmured. "Body modification that involves creating a hole in the body for decorative purposes." He pierced my eyes with a chilling intensity. "There are teeth in these lands." I chuckled nervously, chalking it up to the old man's superstitions from the village. I wish I had received a response regarding the furthermore, ithamore, iode. I savored the sharp taste of the bitter coffee before pressing down on the accelerator. The caffeine rush lifted the haze, and it was then that I spotted the headlights in my rear-view mirror. Initially, it didn't cross my mind at all. As the night unfolded, a lone traveler found themselves navigating the expansive solitude of the American Southwest. Yet, as time ticked by and the car stood still, neither advancing nor retreating, a sense of unease began to stir within me. The vehicle trailing me picked up speed, perfectly aligning with my pace, prompting me to ease off the accelerator too. My palms were slick against the steering wheel, a clear indication that I was being followed. I tried to call 911 on my phone, but the signal was spotty, leaving me feeling trapped. In the depths of utter emptiness, with no allies in sight, I faced an interminable road and an unseen threat lurking in the shadows. Suddenly, the headlights behind me ignited with a chilling brilliance, searing my vision. As clarity returned, a horrifying realization gripped me. The car had closed the distance, and the driver was revealed. He was anything but human. His oversized head and unnaturally wide, dark eyes sent a shiver down my spine. When he smiled, revealing a mouth full of needle-like teeth, I understood the peril I was in. My foot slammed down on the throttle. The engine erupted with a roar as the speedometer climbed. The speedometer soared beyond 100, 110, and 120, while the headlights shone brightly ahead. "Hello there." A beacon flickered in the shadowy rest area a mile off. An unexpected thought gripped me. Perhaps I could leave them behind. Perhaps someone would come to my aid. I made the exit. At a perilous pace as the car glided over the gravel, the rest station emerged ahead, a quaint building featuring restrooms, a few picnic tables, and an empty parking lot. In an instant, I leaped from the car, my adrenaline surging and overpowering any hint of fatigue. As I glanced back, I noticed the other car come to a halt. A flicker of hope ignited within me, suggesting that perhaps they wouldn't pursue me any further. Hope flickered. Perhaps they wouldn't track me down here. That glimmer extinguished the moment I swung open the car door, revealing the creature behind the wheel. It towered, unnaturally tall, its limbs stretched out, bending at grotesque angles. Its sickly gray skin seemed to writhe as if possessed by a life of its own, and its face, God, it lacked a face where features should reside. Only a writhing mass of tentacles twisted around those dark, abyssal voids. It advanced, covering an unfathomable distance in a single stride, and instinct kicked in. I bolted. I hurled myself into the empty rest area lobby, the only sound the buzzing of vending machines in the corner. 2 hallways branched off toward the bathrooms. Without a second thought, I slipped into a cubicle, hoisting myself onto the toilet seat to conceal my feet. With bated breath, I listened intently as the front door let out a haunting creak, slowly swinging open. A presence had made its way inside. I noticed the sound of slow, measured footsteps approaching. The sound reverberated off the bathroom tiles, drawing nearer with each passing moment. Then came a sound, a low murmur, bubbly, guttural, a strange blend of growl and melody. It was anything but human, and I didn't even attempt to pretend otherwise. Shadows danced beneath my cubicle door as I bit my lip until it bled, stifling a scream. The door handle quivered once, then twice, and the lock clicked open. I opened my eyes to see it in the distance, the scent hitting me, a mix of ozone and decaying flesh as its tentacles rose and stretched toward me. I unleashed a scream, a raw expression of desperation, as my hands shot forward, colliding with whatever lay before me. I caught him off guard. He recoiled, more shocked than injured. Seizing the moment, I bolted from the bathroom, my instincts taking over before my mind could catch up. The car was still running, the door ajar behind me, a primal scream of rage echoing in the air. I hurled myself into the car, shifted into reverse, and felt the tires squeal as I sped away. I stepped away from the parking lot and returned to the road, not glancing back. I drove for hours, my eyes glued to the rearview mirror. Yet the creature and its vehicle had vanished without a trace. Though it vanished from my sight, its memory lingered with me each night. Insomnia grips me tightly, as every shadow on the road and each pause at an abandoned gas station pulls me back to that fateful night in the desert, to what I discovered there, and what discovered me. When you're cruising through the darkness alone and spot a shop glowing like an oasis in the desolate night, resist the urge to stop. Keep driving. The night has a way of biting back, and once it sinks its teeth in, it won't let you escape. The headlights emerged in my rearview mirror, resembling twin specters cutting through the night's darkness in the desert. Initially, I brushed them off as just another traveler navigating this desolate stretch of road. As the minutes ticked by and the car behind me maintained an unsettlingly close distance, a wave of unease washed over me. Little did I know, this was merely the first hint of the night that would thrust me into a harrowing struggle for survival. After hours on the road, I found myself traversing the vast Nevada desert, en route to a new job in California. The monotonous landscape had transformed into an endless stretch of bushes and sand, punctuated only by the occasional flicker of a gas station or a solitary restaurant. The clock had long struck midnight, and the weight of fatigue was starting to settle in. I contemplated pulling over at the next rest area for a few hours of sleep when the headlights first appeared. In that moment, they brought a sense of calm. Another human being out there made me feel a bit less isolated. But as the minutes ticked by, the car behind me never attempted to pass, nor did it slow down. It maintained the exact same distance, and I found myself glancing at it more frequently in the rearview mirror. I strained to catch a glimpse of the vehicle or its driver, but the headlights were blinding. All I could discern was a dark silhouette that grew increasingly unsettling with each passing minute. I tried to rationalize the situation, thinking maybe it was someone as weary as I was, using my taillights as a guide. Perhaps he simply lacked the confidence to overtake on a two-lane highway, but ultimately, it was inconsequential. No matter how many excuses I conjured, that primal instinct for danger continued to thrum in my chest. I made the choice to conduct a test. I eased off the accelerator. Additionally, I decreased from 70 to 60, and then to 50. The vehicle trailing me mirrored the action, maintaining a consistent pace without any unnecessary adjustments. In order to preserve that same eerie distance, I quickened my heartbeat, pressed down harder on the pedal, and ramped up the speed to 80, then 90. The headlights trailed behind me, as though an unseen tether connected them to my bumper. I found myself caught up in a whirlwind of imagination. It was merely a car. I felt completely powerless to change my situation. Despite my efforts to relax, my palms were slick against the steering wheel. Additionally, I made contact. Moreover, I found myself on my phone, contemplating whether to call the police. But what exactly would I say to them for assistance? A car is trailing me, maintaining the same distance. They might have dismissed me as paranoid or simply allowed them to take control. With a heavy sigh, I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. It was then that an unknown number vibrated. My finger floated over the answer button. Curiosity and fear were waging a war inside my mind. In the end, fear I won. I let the call go to voicemail, but seconds later it vibrated again. A text message. I opened it with shaky hands. The cold took over my body. I looked at the rearview mirror. The headlights were still there, then blinked as if they were sending me a signal. The adrenaline exploded in my system. Without thinking about it, I stepped on the accelerator. The engine roared while my old sedan reached 100 miles per hour. The desert became a dark blur, but the car behind me also accelerated, and now it was getting closer. Pure fear clouded my mind. Headlights filled my rearview mirror. That's when I almost missed it. A sharp curve. My heart soared. I turned the steering wheel with all my might. The tires squeaked for a second. I felt like the car was going to roll over, but somehow stabilized me. The phone vibrated again. Another message. You can't escape. A wave of panic went through me like an electric shock. This wasn't normal. This couldn't be happening. And then I saw something ahead. A gas station. One of those old roadside ones with a couple of pumps and a rickety store. My only chance. I turned the steering wheel violently, leaving the road car at full speed. The car skidded until it stopped next to a gas pump. I threw myself out of the car, ready to run inside and call for help, but when I turned, the road was empty. There was no car behind me. There was no headlight or sign of anyone following me. It was as if the car had just never existed. The door to the store opened with a squeak. An old man in a baseball cap looked at me with a sleepy expression. Something wrong, boy? Asked in a rough voice. I tried to explain about the car, about the messages, about how he'd been following me. The old man frowned. No car has passed in hours. My lips parted, but I couldn't find words. It was impossible. I'd seen it. I'd felt it. But if I was wrong, I filled up the tank, bought a strong coffee, and hit the road again. I kept repeating that it had been tiredness, that I'd imagined it all, that my mind had played with me. A bad trick, but 5 minutes later my rearview mirror lit up. 2 headlights at the same exact distance. My phone vibrated. A message. For real? You thought you could hide? I wanted to scream. I stomped on the phone. I stepped on the gas and drove without stopping until I saw the lights of a city on the horizon. 3 days later I woke up in a hospital. The doctors said they had found me in a car accident. I had lost the control and crashed into a guardrail. Assured me that the other car never existed. But I know the truth. Sometimes when I drive at night, I see those headlights in my rearview mirror, and for a moment they stay at exactly the same distance, and I wonder it really ended that night, or did it never end at all? The old key felt unnatural, cold in my hand, its intricate design catching the dim attic light while I found myself in front of the locked door that had baffled me for weeks. A mixture of excitement and fear invaded me. I had no idea that turning that key would not only unlock a hidden room, but a new world and a nightmare that had been haunting my family's history for generations. It all started when my great-aunt Mildred passed away, leaving me her huge Victorian mansion on the outskirts of a small town in New York, England. I had only met her a few times, and her decision to make me her sole heir surprised everyone, including me, but as a struggling writer with accumulated debts, I was in no position to turn down such a gift. The house was a marvel, a gigantic 3-story structure with turrets, gables, and more rooms than I could count. Yet I was in desperate need of renovation, with wallpaper peeling off floors squeaky and a stale smell that seemed to emanate from the very walls. I threw myself into the restoration project enthusiastically, seeing it as a welcome distraction from my writer's block and as a potential goldmine of inspiration for my next novel. Room by room, I cleaned, repaired, and modernized the house's hidden surroundings. But a door resisting my efforts, located at the end of a long hallway on the 3rd floor, remained stubbornly locked despite my multiple attempts to open it. None of the keys I had found in the house worked, and the local sawmill had scratched his head, bewildered by its peculiar mechanism. "I've never seen anything like it," he muttered, putting away his tools in frustration. "It's as if H was destined to be opened." His words should have been a warning, but they only stoked my curiosity. What could be so important as to need such a padlock? Elaborated what secrets Aunt Mildred was hiding. The breakthrough came when I was going through a box of old family photographs in the attic, hidden among sepia portraits of ancestors with a severo face. I found an envelope addressed to me with Aunt Mildred's trembling writing inside. There was a single sheet of paper and a small ornate key. The letter was short and enigmatic. "Dear nephew, if you are reading this, then I am gone and the house is Yours with it comes a responsibility that I hoped to be able to free you, but the blood calls, and the time has come for you to know the truth. The key opens the locked door. What you find there will change. Be brave, be strong, and above all be careful. Some doors once opened can never be locked again. With love, your Aunt Mildred. And now here I was with the key in my hand, and my heart I hold it out in anticipation. A part of me wanted to heed the warning of beating Mildred, throw away the key and forget the closed door. But an even bigger part, the part that always got me in trouble. I needed to know what was beyond. Inserted the key into the lock, turned gently as if it had been oiled recently instead of having been untouched for years. The door opened with a low creak, revealing a room shrouded in shadows. The smell was the first thing that struck me. A rancid organic scent impregnated with something metallic that made my stomach churn. They adjusted to the gloom. I searched attentively for the light switch, the only naked light bulb hanging from the ceiling flickered, illuminating a scene that would haunt my nightmares for years. The room was barely small, larger than a closet, and its walls were covered in faded red symbols that I didn't recognize. A heavy wooden table dominated the space, its surface stained dark and marked with scratches of use. Shelves lined the walls, crammed with jars of murky liquids, haze of dried herbs, and objects I couldn't or wouldn't identify. But it was the book that caught my attention, massively, and bound in what seemed disturbingly human skin, lay open on the table, its pages covered with dense and scratched writing. As I approached, dragged by a morbid fascination, I realized that the text was in English, although the words barely made sense, and with the third invocation the veil will be lifted, allowing the passage between worlds. But be careful, because what I pass through may not be easily returned. I slammed the book shut with my hands trembling. This had to be done. Aunt Mildred must have been pulling one final prank on me from beyond the grave. There was simply no way this could be real. As I prepared to exit, determined to erase the memory of this room from my mind, something caught my eye, sending a chill down my spine. A photograph pinned to the wall by the door, featuring Aunt Mildred proudly posing in this very space. Same room, surrounded by a group of people in dark robes. Their faces were hidden, but their postures radiated an aura of menace, and there on the table, behind them, lay a body with trembling hands. Hang the closest. As I did so, I noticed a writing on the back, "The Pact of Eternal Night, 1954, the first successful crossing." I backed away, so worth of the photo falling from my hands. This was real symbols. The book, the rituals, my family, my own blood, had been involved in something dark and terrible. As if my realization had triggered something, the house around me seemed to come to life. The floorboards creaked, the walls groaned, and I would swear I heard whispers echoing from empty rooms. Panic took hold of me, and I ran out of the hidden room. Slamming the door shut, panic took over me, and I ran out of the hidden room. Slamming the door shut, I suddenly walked through the house, suddenly seeing it with new eyes. The strange angles of the walls, the hidden symbols in the patterns of the wallpaper, the mirrors that never seemed to reflect quite right. Everything had been there, hidden in plain sight. I didn't stop running until I got to my car, starting with a screech of tires on the gravel. It wasn't until I was miles away, my heart rate finally slowing down, that I realized I still had the key in my hand for the days that followed. I tried to convince myself that it had all been a hallucination, a vivid dream caused by stress and my overactive imagination. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that room, that book, that chilling photograph. I couldn't force myself to go back to the house, but I couldn't get away either. I found myself driving around the area at odd hours, waiting, unwittingly admitted, to see hooded figures slithering in and out of the mansion, or some cosmic aberration seeping through the windows. But the house always remained silent, motionless, unrevealed. None of the secrets I held within, yearning for clarity. I dove deep into research, dedicating endless hours to libraries and online forums focused on the occult. The scant information I uncovered only intensified my quest. The enigma grew more intricate. Mentions of the Covenant of Eternal Night were scarce, yet the fragments I unearthed sketched a chilling ancient narrative focused on dismantling the barrier between our realm and another. My family had been at the heart of it all, generation after generation, laboring in secrecy to unravel the very fabric of reality. Unusual occurrences started to unfold. I would awaken in the dead of night to discover my apartment rearranged, books splayed open to unfamiliar pages, shadows flitting at the edges of my sight, vanishing the moment I attempted to concentrate on them, and dreams intense, haunting dreams of alternate realms and the grotesque beings that dwelled within them. In that moment, I realized I could no longer escape this what my family had initiated, what I had begun. They had opened. The responsibility that Aunt Mildred spoke of in her letter would not close on its own. It was now mine, whether I wanted it or not. So here I am again in front of that fateful door, the key in my hand once more. But this time I am ready. I have learned what I can from the old methods. I have gathered the defenses I have found. I do not know if it will be enough, but I must try, because if I don't close this door, if I don't finish with what my family started, she knows I might. Cross next time. I turn the key in the lock, wondering how many other families keep similar secrets, how many other houses hide rooms full of ancient horrors, and most disturbing of all, how thin the veil really is between our world and the realms beyond. I push the door, preparing for what's to come, whatever it is. There's one thing I'm sure: I'll never look at a locked door the same way again, because I now know that sometimes the scariest monsters aren't the ones hiding under our beds or inside our closets. They're the ones lurking in our family trees, waiting for an unsuspecting descendant to open their music cage. The key felt strangely heavy in my hand as I stood before the towering oak doors of Blackwood Manor. A cold breeze whispered through the neglected gardens, bringing with it a faint scent of decay. I swallowed hard, fighting the urge to turn around and run away. It was just a house, I told myself, just a job. But as I slipped the key into the lock, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on the door to something much more sinister than I could have imagined. I had been desperate for work when I saw the ad on the internet. Caretaker wanted for historic mansion, good pay, minimum responsibilities. Seemed too good to be true, and maybe it was, but my bank account was begging for a break, so I sent my application without thinking too much about it. The owners, Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood, were an older couple who spent most of their time traveling between their multiple properties. The interview was by video call. Their faces were partially obscured by the bad lighting and the worst internet connection. They seemed friendly, if a little eccentric. Their instructions were simple: keep the house in order, check the gardens, and under no circumstances enter the east wing of the third floor. That last part raised a red flag in my mind. But the pay was too good to question now. As I crossed the threshold of the mansion, all my doubts came back at once. The interior of the house. It was like stepping into another era. Heavy velvet curtains blocked most of the natural light, plunging the rooms into a perpetual twilight. Furniture covered with white sheets rose like ghosts in the shadows. The air was charged with a smell of dust and disuse, and something else, something metallic, something vaguely unpleasant. I spent my first day exploring the areas from the house where I was allowed to be. The kitchen was a strange combination of modern appliances and antique fixtures. The library was full of leather-bound books, their spines cracked with age. Each room seemed to contain secrets, shadows of a forgotten past. When night fell, I retreated to the small room the Blackbots had designated for me. It was cozy, with a four-poster bed and a desk by the window. But as I lay down in the dark, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. The first week passed without incident. I fell into a routine of cleaning, small repairs, and long walks through the overgrown gardens. But in the back of my mind there was always the forbidden east wing of the third floor. What was there? Why I couldn't get in? It wasn't long before the answers began to reveal themselves on their own. The eighth night was the first time I heard the noises. I was in the kitchen heating some leftovers when a loud bang rang through the house. I froze. My hand was suspended over the microwave. Silence. Then another thump, followed by a scratching sound. My heart began to pound as I tried to locate the source of the noise. Seemed to be coming from above the east wing. Hello, I called, my most trembling voice of what I would have liked. No answer, just more scratches. I tried to tell myself they were rats or maybe raccoons that had sneaked into the house, but deep down I knew it was something else. I should have called the Blackwoods. I should have reported the noise and let them take care of it, but the curiosity was stronger. I grabbed a flashlight and went upstairs. The third floor was darker than the rest of the house. The air was visibly colder. The sound of scratching intensified as I approached the forbidden wing. It came from behind a door at the end of the hallway, a door secured with a padlock that it looked too new compared to the old hardware in the house. I stood there for what seemed like hours. My hand trembled on the padlock. The Blackwoods warning reverberated in my thoughts, yet the relentless scratching of fingernails drew me in. The wood seemed urgent, almost pleading, and my curiosity prevailed. I ran to the tool shed and returned with a pair of bolt cutters. The padlock was given with a snap. The door creaked open. The sound of scratches stopped. And the silence that was left in place was worse. The plague hit me immediately. That metallic smell I had noticed before. Here it was sortably strong. I struggled with nausea and raised my flashlight. The hallway was in ruins, the wallpaper peeled off in strips. The carpets were threadbare and dusty. But what I did most, it caught my attention were the walls covered with symbols carved directly into Eliso. Some I recognized pentagrams, eyes of Horus, symbols of protection. Others were completely oblivious, their twisted shapes sending shivers down my spine. At the end of the corridor there was another door. This time it was ajar, and inside something moved. A low and guttural growl echoed in the room, followed by the sound of chains tensing. My instinct screamed, "Run away!" But something in it forced me to look inside, so I pushed the door open and saw what was inside. What I saw in that room will haunt me for the rest of my days. It was some kind of laboratory full of arcane equipment and jars with unspeakable things floating inside. But in the center of the room on a metal table was that vaguely humanoid, but everything about it was wrong. Its limbs were too long, his joints bent at impossible angles, his skin was grayish, stretched over a skeleton that seemed to be in constant motion. But the worst thing was his face, or the absence of him. Where his features should have been, there was only a mass of tentacles twisting. He was chained to the table, but when the light of my flashlight reached him, he began to struggle violently. The chains groaned under thee, and then he spoke in a whisper that was at the time a scream. "Free me!" I staggered back, my mind refusing to process what I had just heard. That thing that being had spoken. The voice was impossible, a whisper and a scream at once, as if it came from everywhere and none at the same time. Free me! Panic enveloped me. This couldn't be happening. It couldn't be real. But the chains creaked and the tentacles on his face stirred with an unsettling intelligence, and I knew with a terrifying certainty that if I didn't run away now, maybe I never would. I turned and ran. Walked down the hallway without looking back. Felt his presence behind me. I didn't hear him, but I felt him. Something inside me screamed that if I turned my head and saw him out of those chains, it would be the last thing I'd ever see in my life. I went down the stairs at full speed. When I got to the hall, I almost bumped into them. Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood were standing completely serene, as if waiting for my arrival, too calm. As if I found his housekeeper fleeing in terror was a common occurrence. Mr. Blackwood looked down at the shears he still had in his hand. His expression hardened. "You saw it? Did you see it?" Mrs. Blackwood sighed with resignation. "What a pity, we had so much hope for you." It was at that moment, when I noticed something strange in their appearance. Their skin was moving as if something was stirring beneath it. The features of their faces seemed to flow, changing subtly, as if they were not made to be fixed in horror. I understood the truth. What was on the third floor was not their prisoner or their experiment. It was their child, and they were not human either. I did not wait to see what they would do. I rushed for the door, at first pushing it to the side. I ran faster than I had ever run in my life. The night swallowed La Mansion behind me, but I didn't dare to look back. I didn't want to know if they were following me. I didn't stop until I reached my car, parked half a kilometer from La Mansion. The keys were shaking in my hands while I tried to start the engine. The engine coughed, refused to start. No. Now I turned the key again. The engine roared alive without hesitation. I stepped on the accelerator. I didn't slow down until I was on the main road with the city lights on the Anya. Only then did I breathe. Only then I allowed myself to believe that I was safe. But even with miles between Blackwood Manor and me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me. Something that I wanted to come back. Years have passed since that night. I've changed cities. I even changed my name. I did everything I could to disappear. But I've never managed to forget. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I still hear that voice. Free me. I still smell that metallic smell in my nightmares, and worst of all, sometimes when I pass in front of an old house with its curtains closed and its garden neglected, I wonder what secrets its walls hide. What horrors are waiting to be unleashed in the world. I never knew the full truth about the Blackwoods and their monstrous son. But if I do know this, I'll never take a job again without asking a lot more questions first. Because sometimes the real horrors aren't the monsters hiding in the shadows, but the ones who wear human faces and offer you the key to their home. The first drop of rain hit my windshield like a bad omen. Seconds later the sky opened up and a downpour that reduced my visibility to almost zero. I cursed under my breath, squinting as the windshield wipers fought against the rush of water, and then I saw it, a lone figure on the side of the road, thumbs outstretched in a universal gesture. At that moment I made a decision. a decision that would haunt me for years. I stopped the car. I had been driving for hours across the Texas desert in the direction of El Paso. The drab landscape of distant bushes and plateaus had turned into a blurry gray sea in the rain. My destination was a job interview, a final opportunity to turn my life around after a string of setbacks. The weather had taken a turn for the worse in the last hour, and I was contemplating pulling over when I spotted the hitchhiker. He was a large man with broad shoulders and a thick beard that partially obscured his face. As I pulled up beside him, I noticed a look of relief in his eyes. "Thank you, friend," he said, climbing into the passenger seat. "I thought I was going to drown out there." I nodded, pushing aside the discomfort in my stomach. "Where are you headed?" I asked. "Back to the highway west," he replied. "I have family in New Mexico." We drove on for a while, the only sounds being the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers and the rain drumming on the roof. Every once in a while I would sneak glances at my passenger. His clothes were ragged, his eyes never seemed to sit still, always exploring the car. Something about him didn't feel right, but I tried to ignore it. "Maybe I was just paranoid," John said. Suddenly I got over jumping. "Sorry, my name is John Hawkins." I swallowed. "Dave," I replied gladly. "Dave." The awkward silence returned. After a while John spoke again. "Hey, do you care if we stop at the next gas station?" He gestured to his abdomen. "I need to use the bathroom." I nodded, relieved to have an excuse to take a break from the tension in the car. A few miles ahead, I saw a gas station sign and took the exit. The place was run down with an old flashing neon sign that barely indicated it was still open. I parked next to a gas pump. John came down without saying I said and went to the little convenience store. I stretched out and went outside to fill up the tank, and then a patrol car pulled into the gas station. My heart jumped. I had been speeding without realizing it. But the officer didn't come to me. Instead, he got out of the car and went into the store. Seconds later, I heard screams. The officer emerged, pulling John along with his hands restrained in handcuffs. Our gazes locked, and in his eyes, I glimpsed a chilling mix of rage and hunger that sent a shiver down my spine. The policeman approached me with, "Mr. Sir, I need you to accompany me." Stunned, I followed him to the store. The clerk, an old man with a pale face, was trembling behind the counter. The officer pointed to John, who was now inside the patrol car. "You picked him up on the road?" I nodded slowly. "Yes, I needed a ride." The policeman, he let out a sigh and shook his head. "God, you were lucky enough." "What you're talking about?" The officer looked at me seriously. "That man is a serial killer. We've been looking for him for weeks." The world seemed to stop. The officer continued. "We found at least 7 bodies in 3 different states." "What does it do exactly?" My voice was shaking. The officer clenched his jaw. "Attacks when you least expect it. Kills them and leaves their cars in the middle of nowhere." I felt nauseous. I thought in all the hours I spent with John in the car how easy it would have been for him to break up with me. The officer pulled out his notebook, said he wanted to stop here. I nodded. The cop exchanged a look with his partner. "We found a knife in the new bathroom. I think he was planning to do it here." He almost collapsed me in a chair. I had been minutes away from turning into another victim. I spent hours giving my statement. When they finally let me go, it was already early in the morning. The sky was clear, but I kept feeling caught in a storm. I drove without stopping until the step. My interview didn't matter to me anymore. I just wanted to stay alive. Months later, the trial began. I was called as a key witness. I saw John in court. I was still with that same predatory expression. When I took the stand, he looked me straight in the eye and smiled at me. They found him guilty, but I didn't feel relieved. I knew I would never stop stalking. Years have passed. I have moved on with my life, but every time I see someone hitchhiking, I feel a chill down my spine, and I keep driving because I've learned something. Monsters don't hide under the bed or in closets. Sometimes they sit next to you with a friendly smile, with a finger extended on the road, waiting for someone to pick it up and never see it again. The first time I heard the tear on the walls, I discarded it like mice. But when I pressed my ear against the cold plaster and I heard the rhythmic sound growing louder and more frantic, a chill ran down my spine. Whatever was moving within the walls of my Airbnb was too big to be a rodent and was getting closer. I had booked that old Victorian house for a month-long writing retreat. I needed an escape from the distractions of the city to finally finish my novel. The ad promised historic charm and absolute tranquility. located on the outskirts of a small New England town I'd never heard of. The price was surprisingly low for such a large place, but I assumed it was due to the off-season. When I arrived, the house looked perfect: 3 floors of worn wood planks, gingerbread ornaments on the window frames, and a small tower that would be my writing nook. On the interior was a portal to the 19th century, carved wooden stairs, heavy velvet curtains, and stone fireplaces. It smelled a little musty, and the floor creaked with each step, but all that gave it an authentic air. Just what I needed to write a good horror novel. The first days passed without incident. I wrote from dawn to dusk, interrupting only to eat something quick and walk through the neglected gardens. The words flowed easily, as if the house itself inspired me. Until the 4th night I was in the tower going over my notes, when I heard it for the first time, a faint sound, a scratch. At first I thought it was the wind hitting one against the house, but as I listened more carefully I realized that it came from within, pressing my ear against the wall. The sound was clearer now, a constant scratch, rhythmic, accompanied by of intermittent pauses, and was moving. I climbed up the wall, slowly advancing towards the ceiling. Suddenly stopped. I jumped away, my heart beating in my chest. Mice, I said to myself. Old houses always have mice, but a voice in my head whispered, mice don't move. So I tried to ignore the discomfort and keep writing. But the house didn't feel cozy anymore. Every creak of the floor, every burst of wind outside made me get messed up. Finally I gave up and I went to bed, snuggling under the covers like a child afraid of the dark. The next morning I decided to investigate. I looked for signs of mice or anything that explained the noise. I found nothing, no droppings, no rodent footprints, no bite marks, but in the attic, behind a loose wooden panel, I found something much worse. A diary was old with covered in leather, tattered and yellowed pages. The writing inside was shaky and difficult to decipher. It belonged to a former owner of the house, someone who lived there at the end of the 19th century, described hearing noises on the walls, seeing shadows moving in the corners of his vision, feeling a presence, voices whispering in empty rooms, something that lived inside the house itself. The last message, written in desperate handwriting, simply said, "They have come for God help me. They come through the walls." I closed the diary suddenly, with my hands shaking. It was the work of a madman. It couldn't be real. And yet, as I looked at the shadows in the attic, a twinge of doubt came back to me that night. The scratches came stronger, more insistent. But this time they weren't just coming from one wall. They came from everywhere. The walls, the ceiling, the floor. I curled up in my bed with my heart hammering as the sound intensified, and then something new. A low, guttural growl. Something that couldn't be a mouse. I threw myself off the bed, grabbing my phone. Ran downstairs, and when I walked down the hallway, I saw something that made the blood in my veins freeze. The wallpaper was moving, undulating, as if something was pushing it from the other side. I didn't wait to see what would come out of there. I left the house without even closing the door. I drove all night until I found a hotel, and only when I was in the cold and artificial safety of a cheap motel room did I allow myself to tremble. The next morning I called the owner of the Airbnb. Her answer did not reassure me. "Oh dear," her voice was too calm. "They have woken up again." "True, what do you mean by Han woke up?" I demanded, panic growing in my chest. "What the hell is there in that house?" A heavy silence. Then her voice in a tone, almost, "The house has peculiarities, has been in my family for generations. Sometimes she sleeps." A pause. "Sometimes not." The horror left me speechless. She talked about the house as if she were alive, as if she knew what she was doing. "I will give her money back, of course," she continued, as if nothing had happened past, "and I'll update the listing. Warn future guests. Warn." I spit out the word. "I shouldn't rent. It is dangerous." "Oh, it's not dangerous, darling," she replied softly. "She's just hungry sometimes." The line was cut. I never went back for my things. I bought new clothes, a new laptop, anything to avoid stepping foot in that house again. I tried to tell myself I was being irrational, but deep down I knew the truth. Sometimes in the stillness of the night, I swear I hear scratches on the walls of my apartment. I tell myself it's just the ducks or the structure settling down, but a part of me is questioning. Something followed me from that house. He's waiting until he feels hungry again. I finished my novel, but not the one I had started in that house. Instead, I wrote about what I lived, became a bestseller. They say that it's visceral realism. And if only they knew how real it really is. I don't stay in Airbnbs anymore, just in new hotels, preferably steel and concrete, and every time I walk into a new room the first thing I do is lean my ear against the wall, hold my breath, listen, because now I know the truth. Some houses are more than wood and bricks. Some houses are hungry, and once you've heard them wake up, you never feel really safe again. I've been looking for a house for weeks, desperate to find something I could afford in this ridiculously expensive market. When I saw the ad for this old Victorian house on the outskirts of town, I thought it was too good to be true. The price was well below market value. The photos showed a house with a good foundation. It just needed a bit of renovation. I should have known something was wrong with real estate, as in life. If something seems too good to be true, probably the realtor is. A man named Frank had been strangely insistent that I visit the house that same day. He called me 3 times that morning, rushing me to come before someone else took it. That should have been my first warning sign, but I was too excited to find it. My possible home to notice as we toured the house. Frank kept talking, pointing out original features, trying to hide the obvious deterioration of the place. I tried to imagine the potential of the house, thinking about how beautiful it could look with a coat of paint and some repairs, but I couldn't ignore the growing discomfort in my stomach. Something was wrong, and then we arrived at the attic. Frank was in front of me, going up the staircase continued with its salesman's chatter, until it suddenly stopped so abruptly that I almost bumped into it. "All right?" I asked, trying to see what had made it stop. Frank didn't answer. He just stood there stiffly staring at something in the attic shadow. Then he slowly turned to me, and the change in his expression made my blood run cold. The real estate agent's friendly smile had disappeared in its place. There was something else. His eyes weren't the same anymore. They looked darker, more intense, and when he spoke his voice had a deep, raspy tone that turned my stomach. "You shouldn't have come here." Every cell in my body screamed to run. "What are you talking about?" I said, backing away. Frank cracked a cruel smile. "Oh, I invited you, yes." His voice dropped to a whisper. "But no, for the reasons you think." I turned around I ran away, but Frank was faster. His hand grabbed my arm with impossible force. He wasn't a big man, but his grip was like an iron tourniquet. "You're not going anywhere," he growled. Panic took over me. I hit with all my might. My fist hit his jaw. The blow caught him, loosening his grip enough for me to free myself. I ran down the stairs from attic to all speed, but Frank was coming behind me. His footsteps echoed in the house. I ran through the halls, remembering the previous route and looking for the quickest exit. But when I got to the front door, my heart stopped. It was closed, and not with a normal deadbolt. There was no visible lock. It was as if the door had merged with the wall, as if the house wouldn't let me out. Frank's laughter resounded behind. "You thought it would be so easy." I turned around looking for another way out. I tried to break a window, but the glass was hard, unbreakable. It was like hitting solid steel. Panic strangled my throat. I was trapped. Frank kept coming closer. But now it was no longer Frank. The thing in front of me squirmed and changed. Its skin took on a sickly gray hue. Its features distorted, stretching and shrinking in impossible ways. And its eyes were no longer eyes. They were dark wells, empty. "I am," the guardian said in a voice that sounded like it came from the walls themselves. "And you are the sacrifice this house has been waiting for." I didn't wait to see what that meant. I threw myself down a side hallway, desperately looking for something I could use as a weapon. I got to the kitchen. My gaze swept frantically around the room. I saw a cast iron skillet on the stove. I grabbed it, and when the thing that used to be Frank came in, I hit it with all my might. The bang echoed with a disgusting crack. The creature staggered, a black liquid dripping from the wound, but he didn't fall alone. He laughed, a laugh that came not only from his mouth but from the walls. "Oh, you're a fighter," he said. "The thing. That makes it so much funnier." I ran aimlessly. The hallways lengthened, the doors disappeared, the house was changing around me, the walls were whispering, the floor seemed to move. The air was suffocating, like I was breathing inside a living monster. And then I saw something, a little desk in the entryway, with an open drawer inside. There was an old, rusty key. Grabbed it, felt the footsteps of the creature approaching, ran to the door, put the key in the lock. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the metal shoved the bolt, the door moved, slammed open. I slapped out of the house. The fresh air hit me like a slap. I stumbled and fell to the floor, panting. When I looked back, the house changed before my eyes. The windows turned into open mouths, the porch steps twisted. The structure seemed to be breathing, and there at the door, the guardian was looking at me, but he didn't cross the threshold. He just smiled. "The house remembers and will be waiting." The door slammed shut, and in the blink of an eye, the house looked normal again. Just an old Victorian house, as if nothing had happened. I ran until I arrived in a busy area of the city. When I tried to tell what had happened, no one believed me. Frank, the real Frank, was safe in his house, no memory of showing the property, and the advertisement for the house disappeared from the internet. I have learned something since then. Some houses are not looking for inhabitants, looking for prey, and in my nightmares I always end up in front of that door again because the house remembers. And continues, music. Waiting for the chairlift. It groaned to a stop, leaving me suspended high above the snow-covered slopes. As the wind increased, whistling through the bare trees, I felt the first hints of fear running down my back. Something moved in the forest below, a dark shadow that slithered between the pines. It was then that I realized I was not alone on this mountain, and whatever was down there was hunting me. Always delighted to ski. The adrenaline rush as you hurtled down the mountain, the cold air biting my cheeks, the feeling of freedom that comes with being surrounded by nature's untamed beauty. But this solo trip to a remote ski resort in the Colorado Rockies wasn't just about gliding down the slopes. It was about finding myself again. After a brutal year, I saw the end of my marriage and the loss of a job I once loved. The resort was small, familiar, and off the beaten track, perfect for someone looking to escape the crowds and find some loneliness. I had arrived late the night before. Strange exchange of glances when I mentioned that I was there alone. "Just make sure you get back before dark," the woman said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The mountain, it can be unpredictable at night. Dismissal, attributing them to a local concerned about an urbanite like me. Now, as he hung in the growing gloom, his words came back for the day. It had started perfectly. Blue skies, freshly fallen snow, and practically empty tracks. I spent hours descending the mountain, feeling more alive with each descent. As the afternoon progressed, I decided to do one last run before calling it a day. That's when things started to come out bad. First, it was little things. A ski that kept dropping despite having checked the bindings a dozen times. The sudden appearance of thick, rapid fog that hid the trail signs, and then the unmistakable feeling of being watched. I stopped mid-mountain ostensibly to adjust my gear, but actually to scan the tree line. Big for a deer or fox, too fast and agile to be a bear, whatever it was, kept in my path, always right out of my sight. Clara, her heart pounding in my chest. I pushed myself again, abandoning any pretense of enjoying the descent. Now it was about getting back to base as quickly as possible. But in my haste and growing panic, I must have taken a wrong turn. The trail became unknown, steeper and rougher than any I had encountered before, and then the chairlift, my last hope for a quick escape back to safety. Except now it was stopped, leaving me exposed and vulnerable. The wind picked up again, swinging the chair. I clung tighter to the safety bar, my gloved hands slippery with nervous sweat. The darkness below seemed to move, and I couldn't tell if they were just shadows playing tricks in my eyes, or if there really was something down there circling, waiting. A howl pierced the air, long and pitiful, but with a hue that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. It didn't sound like any wolf I'd ever heard before. It sounded bad. The chairlift shook down a few centimeters before stopping again. I bit my lip to hold back a scream, my heart beating with so loud that I thought it might burst in my chest. "Hello," I shouted, my voice sounding small and frightened in the vast whiteness. "There is someone there. The chairlift is stuck." Silence, not even an echo. It was as if the mountain itself held its breath, and then a response, but not the one I expected. Another howl, closer, this time followed by another and another, a chorus of inhuman voices rising from the forest below. The chairlift trembled again, and this time it didn't stop. It started descending slowly at first, then increasing speed. For a moment, I felt a surge of relief. The chairlift was running again. I was going to get back to base. But when the ground started to approach at full speed, I realized to my horror that this was not a controlled descent. The cable had broken. I had just enough time to take a puff before the chair hit the snow. The pain exploded in my body as I was thrown rolling down the hill until I crashed into a tree. For a few moments, I just stood there, dazed and gasping for air. Everything hurt, but a quick mental inventory suggested that nothing was broken. Little mercies. The howls were closer, now mixed with a sound that might have been laughter if it hadn't been so chilling. I forced myself to my feet, fighting the pain in the deep snow. One of my skis had come loose on the fall. The other was bent at a strange, useless angle. I began to move downhill, hoping against all hope that I was going in the right direction. The fog was denser now, limiting my visibility to only a few feet in either direction. The sun had set, leaving only the faint twilight glow to light my way. Something crashed through the undergrowth behind me. I quickened my pace, no longer caring about stealth or caution. Pure animal instinct took hold of me. Run or die. I ran, or at least I tried. The deep snow and my wounds made every step a struggle. I could hear them behind me, getting closer. The sounds they made were not at all animal or animal. All humans were something in between, and that made them even more terrifying. A clearing appeared ahead, and I ran towards it, hoping to find better ground, a reference, anything to help me orient myself. Instead, I found myself at the edge of a frozen lake, ice disappearing into the fog. I turned, ready to find another way, but it was too late. They were here. They emerged from the trees like nightmares made flesh, vaguely human in shape, but twisted incorrectly, patches of fur-covered gray fur, faces with a horrific mix of human and wolf, glowing eyes that stared at me with predatory intent. Say, take a step back, my feet slipping on the icy shore. Please whisper. Though I knew it was useless, these creatures were not interested in pleas or negotiations. The largest of them, a huge brute with a shattered ear, stepped forward as his voice was a guttural growl that somehow formed words welcome. "Little skier," said, his lips retracting to reveal yellowish fangs, "we've been waiting for you." I took another step back, feeling the ice crunch under my feet. The creature's eyes widened from what might have been fear, crossing his inhuman face. "Careful," he growled the ice, but it was too late. With a thunderous crack, the surface snapped under me. The water fell, frost enveloped me, digging into my skin like thousands of needles. The impact took my breath away, and for an instant my world became pure cold and darkness. I kicked desperately, trying to surface, but the current under the ice dragged me deeper through the murky water. I managed to see the crack I had fallen through. The creatures were standing there at the edge of the hole, but they didn't try to help me. They didn't try to get in behind me. They stood there watching. Maybe they couldn't cross. Maybe the ice was their limit. That's why I'd been cornered here. The cold wrapped me like a blanket, and my body began to numb. My vision darkened at the edges. My last conscious thought was about the old lady at the resort. Her cryptic warning. The mountain can be unpredictable at night. If only I would have heard. I don't know how long. I was underwater. Seconds, minutes, hours. Time lost all meaning in that icy blackness. But somehow, against all logic, I survived. I woke up in a hospital bed, surrounded by beeping machines and worried faces. They told me that a search team had found me on the shore of the lake. I was barely living. Hypothermia, they said, hallucinations caused by the cold and trauma. But I knew the truth. I knew what I had seen. I knew what had chased me through that forest, and I knew that somewhere in the wild vastness of the Rocky Mountains they were still there, waiting, watching, hungry. I don't ski anymore. In fact, I avoid the mountains whenever I can, but sometimes on cold winter nights, when the wind howls outside my window, I find myself listening, wondering and thanking whatever force of fate allowed me escape that icy hell, because I know that for every story like mine, for every lucky survivor who manages to return to tell their experience, there are dozens more who disappear into the wild, never again seen, claimed by the mountain and by the monsters that call it home. The sound of metal scraping against metal woke me up suddenly. For a moment I was disoriented. The unknown shadows of the motel room, they were playing with my tired eyes. Then I heard it again. The unmistakable sound of someone trying to open my door. My heart jumped to my throat as I realized this wasn't a dream. Someone I was trying to get in. I hadn't planned to stop at this ramshackle motel just off Interstate 40. My trip from New York to Los Angeles was supposed to be non-stop, fueled by energy drinks and the promise of a new life in the West Coast, but after 16 hours on the road, exhaustion overcame me. The flickering vacancy sign had been a beacon in the night, promising a few hours of needed rest. Now, as I lay frozen in bed, being the lingering scratch on my door, I regretted my decision. The swirt clicked, and the door began to open. In a panic, I rolled out of bed and fell to the floor, my mind turning. Who was entering? A thief, someone with much worse intentions. I cursed not having checked that the latch was secured before falling. Surrendered on the bed. The door opened completely, and a light coming parking filtered into the darkness. A silhouette appeared on the high threshold of broad shoulders. Definitely a man. Held his breath, praying that he would not notice me. Curled up on the other side of the bed. "Hello," a hoarse voice called. "Sorry for disturbing, but there was a mistake with the rooms." I remained silent, my heart beating so hard I was sure he could hear it. The man stepped inside the room, feeling the light switch. "I know there's someone here," the front desk said. This room was occupied. The overhead light flickered, and it came on suddenly. between I closed my eyes at the sudden clarity, momentarily blinded. What the hell, the man exclaimed. Finally seeing me on the floor. What are you doing there? I jumped to my feet, keeping the between us. What am I doing? What are you doing? This is my room. The man raised his hands, holding a key card in one of them. Wow, calm down. As I said, there was a mistake. The front desk gave me this key, and they told me this was my room. I looked at him suspiciously. He looked like he was in his 40s, with graying hair and the weathered face of someone who spends a lot of time outdoors, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, a fairly common mid-country outfit. Nothing in him screamed dangerous criminal, but I'd seen enough true crime documentaries to know that appearances could be deceiving. Look, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Obviously there was an error. Why don't you go back to the front desk and clear it up? He nodded, looking as uncomfortable as I felt. Yes, it's probably for the best. Sorry for this. He turned around and I felt a wave of relief, but when he reached out to grab the handle, the lights flickered and went out. I plunged into the darkness. Ah, muttered the man. Power cut on the bedside table. Looking for my phone, and I used the flashlight to illuminate the room. The man was still by the door, his expression a mixture of confusion and concern. Maybe we should go to the reception together, I suggested unintentionally, to be left alone in a dark room with a stranger who had a key to my door. He nodded and we went out into the hallway. The emergency lights were on, casting a ghostly glow on the worn carpet and peeling wallpaper as we walked down the streets. Stairs. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The front desk was deserted. There was no night manager. No sign of where could I have gone. Hi, I called. There is someone here. Silence. The man who introduced himself as Mike during our tour tried to open the door to the locked back office. This is weird, muttered. There was a guy here when I checked in 20 minutes ago. A chill ran down my spine. We should call to the police. Mike nodded and pulled out his phone, but his sign frowned. There's no signal, and you checked mine. Nothing like that. We stood there in the dim emergency light with the silence of the motel would have suddenly gone quiet. Maybe we should check outside, Mike suggested, to see if there's anyone else. Hesitant on the one hand, I didn't want to go anywhere with this stranger on the other. The thought of being left alone in this eerily quiet motel was even less inviting. Okay, I accepted, but let's be quick. Pushed the front doors and out into the parking lot. The first thing I noticed was the cars, or rather the lack of them. When I arrived before, there were at least half a dozen vehicles. Now the lot was empty except for my old Vibe, and what I assumed was Mike's truck. Where is everyone? I whispered, more to myself than to Mike. Shook his head, looking as bewildered as I am. I don't know. It's not right. We walked down the road hoping to stop some passing cars, but the highway that had been busy even late at night when I arrived was deserted. Neither cars nor trucks, not even the distant sound of an engine. What the hell is going on? Mike's voice had a tinge of panic now. I was about to suggest that from the road between. I closed my eyes, trying to make out what it was. Mike, I said in my voice barely above a whisper. You see that? He followed my gaze, tensing beside me. Yes, what's like? I was answering his question. The figure moved into the dim light of the motel sign. My breath got stuck in my throat. It was humanoid, but somehow wrong way, too high. His limbs too long and articulated at impossible angles. His skin, if it could be called that, seemed to move and ripple like oil on water, and his face, where his features should have been, there was only a smooth, featureless expanse like a mannequin's head. Run, he whispered. Mike, run. We turned and ran back to the motel. Behind us I heard a sound. It wasn't footsteps, but a wet, slippery noise that turned my stomach. We went through the front doors and slammed them shut behind us. Mike dragged a heavy chair and put it against the door, stuck inside. What was that thing? I gasped, trying to catch my breath. Mike shook his head, his face pale. I don't know, I've never seen anything like it. A knock on the door made us both jump. The thing was outside, trying to get in. We have to find a way out, I said, trying to keep calm. We ran through the motel, checking every door and window, all closed, all unbreakable, as if the building had been transformed into a fortress or a prison. When we returned to the lobby, defeated and horrified, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. The clock behind the counter had stopped, but that wasn't the strange thing. It was the time it showed. The hands marked exactly the 12 o'clock midnight. The witching hour, Mike said slowly. What time did you do the chime? He looked at his watch and frowned, then did a double take. That's impossible. My watch also says midnight, but I did the check-in around 11:30. A horrible feeling began to form in my mind, and if I swallowed, what if we are no longer in the real world, and if when the clock struck at midnight we were transported somewhere else? Mike looked at me like I was crazy. but I could see the doubt in his eyes after what we'd seen outside. Maybe something it was really impossible. The knocks on the door got louder. Cracks started to appear in the wood. We have to find a way to break this, whatever it is, I said. There must be a way to get back. Mike nodded, his jaw clenched with determination. Well, let's think about the stories. There's always a key, a ritual or something like that. You did something unusual when you arrived. I tried to remember every detail of my registration. The room card, I said. Suddenly the manager made a big fuss about not losing it. He said it was the key to a good night's rest. Mike's eyes widened. That's the key. Where is your card? Palped my pockets, the panic growing. When I didn't find her, must be in my room. We ran stairs upstairs while the sound of the wood was still ringing behind us. Whatever was outside was about to go in. My hands were shaking as I searched the room, pushing blankets aside and rummaging through my belongings. I finally found it. It was tucked between the pages of Gideon's Bible, in the drawer of the bedside table. I have it, I screamed triumphantly. Just at that moment we heard it, that wet, slippery sound going up the floors. Stairs. What do we do? Asked Mike, his voice strained with fear. I looked at the card and then the door. Maybe we need to check out. It was a crazy idea, but it was all we had. I ran to the door and slipped the card down the reader. For a moment nothing happened. Then the world seemed to wobble and blur around us. I felt a falling sensation and then jolt awake in my parked car in front of the motel. The clock on the dashboard read 11:28 at night. My heart was pounding. But looking around, everything seemed normal. Cars in the parking lot, lights on in the office. As I sat there trying to make sense of what had happened, another car stopped. A van pulled up. The man who got out looked familiar. Hair between cano, flannel shirt. Our eyes met and I saw the same relief and the same lingering fear reflected in his eyes. Without saying a word, we both started the engines and drove away, leaving the motel behind and its secrets. To this day, I don't know if what we experienced was real or some kind of shared hallucination, but there's something I'm sure of. I'll never stay in a roadside motel again, and I always check out before midnight from the sign. Rusty rustled in the wind, its faded letters, barely legible, welcome to 512. As we passed it, a chill ran down my spine. Even though the autumn air was mild, there was something about this town that felt wrong, like it was out of place, out of alignment in reality, in a way I couldn't explain but didn't know yet. I still didn't understand that this was my last warning before I fell into a nightmare of which my girlfriend Sarah and I had been driving for hours from Chicago to Denver to visit her parents. We had decided to take a more scenic route, avoiding the monotony of the highway in favor of rural roads and the charms of small towns. It had been Sarah's idea to cut through this foggy area, a shortcut that she found in a little-known travel pad. It will be an adventure, he said excitedly, his smile shining in the golden light of the sunset. Who knows what hidden gems we might find? I should have known better in horror movies. The shortcut is always what kills you. But this wasn't a movie. True, mistake, a fatal mistake at first glance. Millbrook looked like any other Midwestern town. A center with modest shops, a square with a nice kiosk, wooden houses with porches adorned with autumn pumpkins. But something was wrong. There was no one on the street. Not that it was quiet, it was empty. No cars on the road, no children playing in the yards. Not even a stray dog prowling. The windows seemed open, but there were no customers. The few faces we saw behind the windows of the houses, they were just staring without blinking, without moving, just watching us as I drove down the main street. Maybe it's time of the nap or something, Sarah joked, but her laughter sounded forced. We stopped in front of a restaurant. Mel's Eats was the only place that showed signs of life, with a neon sign flashing on the open window. We just eat something quick and keep going, I said, trying to hide my growing discomfort. The bell over the door rang as we entered. All the heads in the place turned to look at each other. The silence, it was sepulchral. We slid into a booth, the sound of vinyl crunching. Beneath us a waitress came closer. Her smile was too big, too fixed. Welcome to Mel's, she said in a monotone. They're not from around here. We shook our heads for a moment. Her eyes flashed with hunger. Well then, you're in luck, she said, her smile without changing today. The specialty is Mel's meatloaf, to die for. The emphasis in those words, it made my nerves stand on end. Sarah and I exchanged glances. Just a couple of sandwiches and soft drinks, please, I said, wanting to finish quickly. When the waitress left, Sarah leaned towards me. Something is weird in this place, I nodded. We finished eating and left. The food arrived too fast, too much. We ate it in silence, feeling watched. When the bill arrived, I threw a bill on the table without bothering to wait. We stood up, and then a shadow blocked our path. He was a huge man, almost 2 meters tall, with shoulders and hands like bricks. Are already leaving, he said in a deep voice, but the fun is just beginning. I tried to say something, but Sarah grabbed my hand and pulled me. Run. We ran to the back of the restaurant, pushed the kitchen door, and met a cook standing next to a bubbling pot. His face was expressionless, but the smell, God, the smell that came out of that pot was meat, but not beef, not pork. Something else, something worse. We didn't stop. We pushed the back door and went out into an alley behind us. We heard screams. They were chasing us. The car was chasing us. Sarah turned the corner onto the main street, but the car was no longer in place. A group of people was waiting for us, only they no longer looked like people. Their bodies lengthened in an impossible way. Their faces changed. They melted like reflections in a distorted mirror. My God, whispered Sarah. I took her hand and we ran in the other direction. The streets looked like a labyrinth. Every corner that backed to the town square. Every time we thought we escaped, they were there. Closer and closer. Finally, we found ourselves in the Costco. There was no way out, and then the world changed. The blue sky turned a sickly green. The buildings twisted at impossible angles. The ground shook beneath us, and the creatures dropped their human disguise. They were no longer villagers. They were no longer people. They were things with mouths that wouldn't stop smiling, with eyes that wouldn't stop looking, with hands that stretched out, hooked and bony, ready to catch one of them. Mel's waitress came over now. She was a jumble of tentacles and eyes. Will stay for dinner. True, she whispered, with a mouth too big like the main course. Sarah squeezed my hand. There was no escape, but then we understood. If we were going to die, we wouldn't do it without a fight. We rushed forward, taking them by surprise. We pushed, we hit, we made our way through their bodies that twisted and changed. Their screams were inhuman. They chased us, their arms stretching more than natural, but we kept running, running until the road appeared in front of us, and as we crossed the village line, everything disappeared where Millbrook had been before. Now there was only an empty field, no buildings, no signs, no traces that a village had been there. Sarah and I looked at each other, trembling. A car passed by the road. We stopped it. A friendly couple took us to the next town. When we counted what happened, the police didn't find anything. According to them, Millbrook never told us. It must have been a hallucination. But we know the truth now. If we see a sign for a town that's not on the map, we don't stop. We don't take any chances. Because we know that some towns shouldn't exist, and that sometimes the special of the day in the cafeteria, it's really to die for. Literally, the sick creak of counter metal broke the stillness of the night, shaking him. The screech of tires against the gravel echoed in the silent vastness. I had no idea that this accident was only the beginning of a nightmare that would test the limits of my survival and my sanity. I had been driving for hours, and from Los Angeles to Phoenix for a job interview. The desert road stretched endlessly before me, a black ribbon that cut through the landscape, moonlit. I must have fallen asleep for just a second, a moment of weakness after hours of monotonous driving. That was all it took for disaster to strike. My old Honda Civic ended up in a ditch, slanted at an angle. The front was crumpled like an aluminum can, steam shook under the hood, and the pungent smell of burning rubber filled the air. I sat there for a moment, dazed, my heart pounding in my chest. A quick assessment confirmed that I had no serious injuries, just a few bruises and a cut on my forehead that bled more than it hurt. I reached for my phone. But of course there was no signal. I was in the middle of nowhere, miles from the last town I had passed, and who knows how far from the next one. The realization of how isolated I was began to sink into me, bringing with it a wave of panic. It was then that I saw the headlights approaching in my rearview mirror. The relief invaded me. Someone was coming. Someone could help me. The truck stopped behind my car. From wrecked in the light of the headlights, I could make out the figure of a man getting out of the driver's seat. "You're fine in there?" asked a harsh voice. I pushed the door of my car, moaning. "When the bent metal reach in?" "Yes," I answered with a trembling voice. "I think so. Just dazed." The man approached, and his features became clearer. He was tall and robust, with a face weathered by years under the desert sun. But it was his eyes that disturbed me, intense, too fixed on mine. "What a mess you have here," he said, inspecting the damage. "You're lucky to have walked out." I nodded, still a little dizzy. "Yes, I should have fallen asleep at the wheel. Stupid." "I know," he growled in approval. "Well, that car won't suit you to take you nowhere tonight. The nearest town is about 50 miles in that direction." He pointed with a thumb over his shoulder. "I can take you. I have a phone in my house for you to call a tow truck." I hesitated. Every instinct told me to be wary of strangers, especially in the middle of nowhere. But what choice did I have? I couldn't stay there with my wrecked car, and walk 50 miles through the desert in the middle of the night wasn't an option. "It would be great, thank you," I said, trying to sound confident. He nodded and went back to his truck. "My name is Earl, by the way," he said over his shoulder, John. I responded by picking up what I could from my car before locking it up. When I got into the LL truck, the restlessness in my stomach grew. The inside was messy, and it smelled like stale cigarettes and something else, something metallic, vaguely unpleasant. Earl started the engine and he rejoined the road. We drove silently across the drab desert landscape past us. I tried to strike up a conversation, but Earl's answers were curt, bordering on hostility. 20 minutes later he turned onto a dirt road that was barely distinguishable. It was then, when the anxiety in my chest turned to sheer terror. The dirt road was uneven and barely visible in the dim moonlight. The truck, it shook with each bump, making my nerves tense even more. "Where exactly you live?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. Earl didn't take his eyes off the road not far away. He growled another jolt, threw us against the seats. I felt fear curl up in my stomach. After about 10 more minutes of tense silence, the structure appeared in the gloom. It was a ramshackle house, more like a large and neglected cabin surrounded by piles of scrap metal and rusty car parts. It looked like a scene out of a horror movie. Earl turned off the engine and got out of the truck. "Well, here we are. Come in and I'll let you use the phone." Every instinct in my body screamed not to run, get back on the road. It's better to walk 50 miles than to get in there. But the fear of the desert, of the absolute loneliness of the night, paralyzed me. I inspired deep and I followed him inside the house. The smell inside was worse than in the truck. A moose sweat, rancid and something metallic like dried blood. He pointed to an old one hanging on the wall. "There you have it," he said without looking at me. "Call whoever you need." He walked away down the hallway. Without another word I approached the phone and picked up the receiver. Silence. There was no dial tone. My skin bristled. Earl called, my voice shaking. "The phone doesn't work." Silence. I left the kitchen and looked down the dark hallway. Earl, nothing. It was then that I heard it, a muffled sound. A moan came from behind a half-open door at the end of the hallway. Every rational part of my being told me to leave, to run out of that house and not look back, but curiosity, that impulse, pushed me towards the door. I pushed carefully and I opened it a little wider. What I saw inside will haunt me for the rest of my life. It was a kind of makeshift operating room. Fluorescent lights flickered, casting jagged shadows on a blood-covered room in the center. A metal table, and on it a person, or what was left of it. My stomach churned. I had to cover my mouth so as not to vomit. Parts of the body had been removed, exposed organs, and next to the table, with a blood-stained apron and scalpel in hand, was Earl. He slowly turned to me. Well, he muttered with a chilling calm. "You shouldn't have seen this." He leaned forward, the scalpel glowing in the dim light. I ran. I shot out of the room without looking back, with the sound of his hurried footsteps behind me. I stumbled into the kitchen, knocking over a chair. My only thought was the front door had to come out of there. I felt the air move behind me when Earl tried to grab me. My hand found the handle and turned it desperately. The door slammed open and I threw myself outside. I ran like never before in my life, going into the darkness of the desert. I could hear Earl behind me cursing, but his footsteps stopped soon. I didn't hear him go. I didn't know if it was because he wasn't interested chasing me or because I didn't need to. I ran until my legs couldn't take it anymore. When I finally looked back, the house had disappeared in the distance, but the feeling of being watched never faded. I walked all night, guided alone by the stars, until I saw the road at dawn. I crashed exhausted. A truck appeared on the horizon and stopped. When the driver saw me, an older man with a worried expression helped me up. "What the hell happened to you?" he asked. I had no words to explain it. He took me to the nearest town, where I went straight to the police station. They found the house, and with it, evidence of horrors going back decades. Cases of missing people in 3 states closed at once, but Earl was never found. He had disappeared into the desert he knew so well. Since that night, I've tried to move on. I've tried to forget what he had done. What I saw in that house haunts me every time I drive down a deserted road. When I see lights in the rearview mirror, fear returns. I think of all the monsters that walk among us with human faces. I keep my eyes on the road, doors closed, windows blocked, because I learned a lesson that night. The most dangerous predators aren't the ones that lurk in the dark. They're the ones that offer you help when you're most vulnerable, those who lure you in with the promise of safety, only to show their true faces when you can't escape anymore. So if you ever find yourself stranded on a lonely road in the middle of nowhere, think twice before accepting a stranger's help, because you never know if that good Samaritan could be your worst nightmare. The GPS beeped, telling me to turn down a narrow road of dirt leading into the darkening forest as I drove my car down the unfamiliar path. A sense of stillness came over me. I was about to make a delivery to an address that didn't appear on any map, in an area where cell phones went silent and outsiders were not welcome. I had no idea that I was driving straight into a nightmare that defied everything I wanted. I thought I knew about reality. My name is Alex and I've been working as a delivery driver for 3 years. It's not a glamorous job, but it pays the bills and I enjoy the quiet of the road. That night, just as I was about to determine my shift, I received a last-minute delivery. The package didn't have any labels, which was rare, and the address was so remote that my supervisor had to manually enter it into the GPS before of me leaving. He looked at me with a frown. "Be careful out there," he warned. "That area can be tricky." I laughed, downplaying the importance, but as I drove farther and farther away from civilization, his words echoed in my mind. The trees seemed to close in on the road, their branches forming a kind of natural tunnel. What little sunlight was left barely making it through the dense foliage after what seemed though it was probably only 40 minutes. I came to a clearing in the center. A ramshackle cabin stood in the undergrowth. The wood, it was rotten in places, and the roof seemed slanted under its own weight. A flickering light on the porch was the only sign of life. I parked the car, and in my hand climbed the creaking porch steps and knocked on the door. The sound echoed strangely in the stillness. "Delivery," I called, trying to sound professional. Silence. Just as I was about to drop off the package and leave, the door opened slowly with a creak. An old man appeared in the doorway. His skin was pale and wrinkled like paper. Old, but the worst thing was his eyes, white and milky eyes that despite their apparent blindness were fixed directly on mine with an unsettling intensity. "You are late," he whispered in a dry voice and brittle. I swallowed hard. "Sorry, sir. The road was hard to find." The old man smiled, showing teeth too sharp to be human. "Oh, it's not hard to find," he said, "for those who are destined to come." Before I could answer, he snatched the package from me with surprising speed, then turned and went into the cabin. The door was left open. "Come in," he said. "A long night awaits you." Every muscle in my body he screamed to run, to get in my car and disappear. But something a little stronger than fear forced me to step forward, and I crossed the threshold. The inside of the cabin was different, bigger than it looked from the outside, cleaner. The walls were covered with shelves full of old books bound in materials I didn't want to examine closely. Strange symbols were carved into the ceiling beams, and it looked like that were writhing under the flickering light of the candles. The old man stood in the center of the room holding the open pate inside. He took out a small ornate box that seemed to pulsate with an internal light. "You know what this is?" he asked. Without looking up, I shook my head. Although I knew immediately that I didn't need me to answer. "It's a key," he continued. "A key for doors that should never have been opened." With a trembling hands opened the box. A high-pitched buzz filled the air. The symbols on the walls began to glow with a spectral blue light. The air became heavy, hard to breathe. "What's going on?" I asked, stepping back towards the door. But when I turned, the door was no longer just a wall of shadows twisting. The old man laughed, a dry and humorless laugh. "The veil is weakening," he whispered. "They're coming." He began to spin. The world around me became distorted, and then I saw creatures coming out of the darkness. They were indescribable troops of limbs that shouldn't exist, eyes in places where they didn't make sense, mouths that didn't stop on a single face. The old man raised his arms, muttering words in a language that burned my ears. I understood that if I didn't do something, this wouldn't end. I threw myself towards the box. If it was the key, maybe closing it would do. My fingers, they closed around the lid, and I pushed it with all my strength. A flash of reaper light flooded the room. The old man screamed. The creatures howled and suddenly silenced. I opened my eyes. I was standing in the middle of the forest. The hut was gone. There was no sign of the old man. Not the symbols, not the mon, only trees and darkness, and in my hand the box. I don't remember taking it, but I knew with every fiber of my being that I couldn't leave it behind. I never went back to work as I could after what I had seen. I spent the next few months researching and discovered something terrifying. There are places where the veil between realities is thin, where things can cross, and there are people who want to open those. Even more people and things that used to be people. Now I spend my days trying to understand what I experienced, trying to figure out what to do with the box, because I know that if it falls into the wrong hands, if it is reopened, we will not have so lucky next time. So if you ever drive down a dark road, following directions to a place that doesn't appear on maps, be careful, because you never know when a routine delivery might turn into a fight for reality itself. And next time maybe there's no one to close the door, the sun-bleached bone peeking out from a blanket of fallen leaves. At first I thought it was just a bit of animal remains, something common on a hike through the national park. But when I bent down to examine it more closely, a shiver ran down my spine. The shape was unmistakable, a human femur, and it was just the beginning of a nightmare that would haunt me for years. My wife Sarah and I had been looking forward to this camping trip for months. We both had high-stress jobs in the city, and the promise of spending a week surrounded by nature was exactly what we needed. We chose a remote route in Yellowstone, eager to escape the crowds and fully immerse ourselves in the wildlife. The first 2 days were perfect. We hiked through breathtaking landscapes, observed wildlife from a safe distance, and spent the nights curled up by the campfire, reconnecting in a way we hadn't done in years. But in the third day, when we turned off the main trail in search of a secluded place to have lunch, everything changed. I was going ahead, making my way through a dense bush, when my foot hit something hard. Then I saw it. The bone, partially buried, but unmistakably human. Sarah approached from behind. Her animated talk about the morning walk was extinguished on her lips. Seeing what I was looking at, that is, she whispered. Unable to finish the sentence, I nodded with a dry mouth. I think we do have to call the rangers. But when I reached out to my phone, Sarah grabbed my arm. Wait, she said, her voice tense with fear. Look. I followed her gaze and felt my stomach sink. A few meters away, partially hidden by a fallen log, there was another bone, and beyond another one wasn't a single wreck. It was a trail against my best. I found myself following him. Sarah stayed close to me, her breath ragged with panic. The more we stared at each other, it was like walking through a nightmare. And then we saw it, a clearing ahead. When he emerged from the trees, the horrific magnitude of what we had discovered unfolded before us. The little meadow was covered with bones, some bleached by the sun, others still with remains of decaying flesh at the end of the day. Minus a dozen bodies, maybe more. Sarah turned and vomited in the bushes. I froze, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. This wasn't a simple accident or even an isolated murder. This was something much worse, a body dump, an extermination camp. We have to get out of here. Sarah gasping her mouth. Now I nodded. We finally turned around to leave, but a sound stopped us in secco, a rustling of rama, followed by the rustle of leaves. Someone was approaching. We threw ourselves behind a huge fallen log. Their voices, low but clearly audible in the sepulchral silence of the forest, made us hold our breath. They were both wearing house clothes, but the weapons they carried were not ordinary rifles. They were military-grade sights and suppressors. The chief is not going to be happy, growled. One of them told us that cleaning it is not our fault, that the ground is too hard to finish. Besides, animals usually take care of most of them. I felt Sarah tense up even more next to me. I was also struggling with the urge to vomit. The coldness with which they talked about the disposal of human bodies froze my blood. Well, let's finish this. Well, let's finish this, said the first. We don't want anyone to stumble over this place too late. I thought bitterly as the men began their task. Sarah and I remained hidden, barely daring to breathe. The minutes turned into an eternity. Finally, the men finished what they had come to do and left the clearing. We waited until their footsteps disappeared completely before we came out of our hiding place. The clearing looked different now. There were fewer bones in sight, more freshly removed. They had been burying the remains. We have to warn someone, Sarah whispered, her pale but determined face. I nodded, but when I took out my phone, a horrible certainty hit me. I have no signal, murmur hers. I don't have a signal. I don't have to do it. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows on the clearing. We were miles from the main trail, in an unknown area of the park, and somewhere nearby there were two armed killers who, if they found us, would undoubtedly make us the next victims. We have to go back to the camp, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. We'll leave at dawn and notify the authorities, Sarah nodded. But no, you had to say out loud what we both thought. We would survive the night. The way back to our camp was hell. Every rustle of branches, every whisper of the wind through the trees, made us stop, convinced that we had been discovered. When we finally arrived at our tent, the night had been an oppressive silence, fell completely. It stretched through the woods. neither crickets nor night birds, just the feeling that someone was watching us that night. We didn't light a campfire. We didn't even go into the tent. We sat in the dark with kitchen knives in our hands, waiting, but no one came. When the first ray of sunlight crossed the horizon, we hurriedly picked up our camp, the trail. Back to the parking lot. It had never seemed so long. Every hiker who passed, every park ranger we saw filled us with relief and terror. They were innocent or part of the operation. We didn't know it. It wasn't until we arrived at the ranger station near the entrance of the park that we finally felt safe. We sat in an office while a team of state police and FBI agents took our statement using maps. We pointed out the location in the days that followed. Our worst fears were confirmed. The site was found exactly where we described it, and the number of bodies was even higher than we imagined. 30 victims, perhaps more. The case revealed a human trafficking and organ harvesting operation with connections that stretched beyond the park. Sarah and I were hailed as heroes, but it didn't feel like a victory. The nightmares began almost immediately. Images of bones rising from the ground, armed figures chasing us through an endless forest. We tried to move on, sought therapy, but trauma came between us. Our jobs began to suffer. Our relationship fell apart. Eventually our marriage didn't hold out. Years have passed since then. I've rebuilt my life, found a new job, even dated someone again. But some nights I wake up with the memory of that first bone in my mind, and sometimes when I walk through a park or a forest I see something white. Among the leaves my heart stops for a second, and suddenly I'm back in that clearing surrounded by death and unspeakable evil. I learned a terrible truth: that day nature may seem beautiful, but beneath the surface the darkest secrets can be buried, and there are paths that once you take them you can never go back. Really of them. The grainy image on the security monitor screen made my blood run cold in my veins. There, in black and white, I saw a figure moving between the shelves of the warehouse. A figure that shouldn't exist. As I watched it, paralyzed with fear, I realized that my monotonous night shift had just become a struggle for survival against something that defied all logic. This job, being a night guard at Millbrook Industrial Storage, was far from what I dreamed of doing with my life, but the bills don't pay themselves. So there I was, 3 months in this monotonous routine, 12 hours of patrolling between endless rows of boxes and machinery in a giant warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The night began like any other. I arrived at 10 o'clock and relieved the guard of the shift. I was daytime and prepared for a long evening of absolute boredom. After making my first round, I settled in front of the security monitors with a thermos of coffee and an old book, but just after midnight I noticed something strange. A flash of movement on one of the screens caught my attention. I leaned forward, squinting for an instant. I would swear I saw a shadow move between the shelves, but when I looked again there was nothing. I sighed, blaming tiredness or my imagination. However, the discomfort did not disappear. An hour later it happened again. This time there was no doubt. A tall and unnatural thin figure gliding through the aisles of the warehouse, moving with an unsettling fluidity. My pulse shot up. I recoiled the video till I made sure what I had seen. But when I reviewed the recording, the figure I wasn't there. Just the empty corridors. A cold ladder ran down my back, and then I heard the sound, a soft, rhythmic tapping like footsteps, but not quite human. It came from the end of the warehouse, near the loading docks. Every instinct in my body told me to stay in the office, to call in reinforcements. But I was the only guard of, and if there was an intruder, it was my job to investigate. With shaky hands, I grabbed my flashlight and radio before heading out to the warehouse. The place felt different at night. During the day, it was a hive of activity with forklifts and workers moving non-stop, but now it was a world of shadows and echoes. The sound of my own footsteps echoed too loudly on the concrete floor. The air was thick, charged with a feeling of oppression. I directed the light of my flashlight towards the loading docks. The tapping was had. Hello, I called, hating how my voice trembled. Silence. I took one more step, then I heard a whisper, a low and guttural growl that could not have come from a human throat. My flashlight trembled in my hand. I turned round with my heart beating in my throat, and for a fraction of a second I saw something tall, too tall, with limbs and bony, bent at impossible angles. Her grayish skin seemed to ripple as if it wasn't completely solid. But the worst thing was her face. She had no eyes, only a mouth, a wide, unnatural mouth, full of needle-sharp teeth. I ran. I ran faster than I had ever run in my life. Pure panic giving me wings. I felt her presence right behind me. her shadow gathering between the shelves while chasing me. I arrived at the office and slammed the door shut. The desk for a moment, everything was silent. Then a scratch on the wood, slow, methodically, the sound of metal giving way under immense pressure. My eyes went to the monitors. Most of the cameras showed the empty corridors, but one by one the creature was just outside the office. The impossible was that I could hear her. I could hear how she scratched the door, but there. She was on the screen looking directly at the camera, and then she greeted me. The door exploded inwards in a shower of splinters. I screamed, covering the hallway. It was deserted. I went back to the monitors. The creature was gone for a moment. I thought I had imagined everything. But then a rumble in the warehouse brought me back to reality. Broken glass, an inhuman shriek that froze. My blood couldn't stay. I had to get out of there. But when I looked for my radio, it wasn't there. I should have dropped it while I ran away. I turned to the pool phone, picked it up with trembling hands. Silence. There was no line. The sound of boxes falling made me jump. The warehouse was in chaos, and somewhere in that darkness something was waiting for me. I only had one option: survive until dawn. I passed the rest of the night barricaded in the office, without taking his eyes off the monitors. Sometimes I saw her, the figure moving through the shadows, and every time she appeared on the screen she did the same thing again. She stopped, turned to the camera, and greeted me. When the morning shift came, they found me in the corner of the office shaking. The warehouse was a mess, shelves overturned, boxes broken, but no sign of the creature. No one believed me. The security recording only showed empty corridors. They said it must have been vandalism. I quit that same day, but it didn't end there, because some nights when I'm alone I hear that tapping, and in the corner of my eye I see a shadow, always just out of my sight. I don't know what I found in that warehouse. I don't know if it was real or if something in my mind broke that night, but I do know one thing: I'll never work a night shift again. Because when the sun goes down and the shadows get longer, things that shouldn't exist emerge to play, and sometimes they just want you to know they're watching you. The ace of my flashlight blinked, casting haunting shadows on the walls of the cave as darkness enveloped us. The realization hit me like a punch in the gut. We weren't alone down here. Something, it was moving in the blackness beyond our light and was getting closer. It had all started as a simple adventure, a plan to explore the infamous caves, Steewater, the center of countless local legends. There were 5 of us: me, my best friend Jake, his girlfriend of mine, and our college classmates, Chris and Sarah. We grew up hearing stories about the caves, tales of lost explorers, unexplained sounds, and phenomena that no one could explain. But we were young, arrogant, and confident that we could handle anything the caves threw at us. How wrong we were. We walked in early in the morning, armed with maps, supplies, and enough enthusiasm to feed a small town. The first few hours were exciting. We admired the rock formations, music, twist from what was planned, attracted by the promise of a huge chamber that, according to rumors, contained prehistoric paintings. It was then that we realized that we were lost. The corridors were identical, labyrinthine rock corridors that seemed to change when we didn't look directly at them. Our maps became useless. The landmarks we had memorized suddenly seemed unfamiliar to us. "This makes no sense," Jake muttered, studying the map for the 100th time. "We should have reached the camera a while ago." Panic began to set in when we understood the gravity of the situation. We were trapped in one of the caves, the biggest in the nation, facing restricted resources and an unclear escape path. In that moment, we were met with an unfamiliar sound, a deep, rumbling echo that resonated from the cave's very walls. It was unlike anything I had ever encountered, a haunting blend of a growl and the grinding of colossal stones. "What just happened?" Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with terror. Silence enveloped us before we could even comprehend what had just happened. The earth shook violently beneath us, sending small rocks and dust cascading from above, as the earthquake roared its fury. Mia shouted, "We have to find shelter." We dashed through the tunnels, the ominous rumble of rocks reverberating behind us. A creature that seemed to emerge from the depths of a nightmare stood before us, vaguely humanoid yet utterly alien. Its body was skeletal and elongated, adorned with an unsettling number of limbs twisted at unnatural angles. The head loomed large and bulbous, devoid of eyes, yet filled with a mouth brimming with needle-sharp teeth. "What the hell is that?" Jake gasped, his voice barely a whisper. Before we could respond, the glass began to crack, the fractures spreading like a spider's web. "We have to get out of here." I urged, surprised at the steadiness of my voice despite the terror that gripped me. Now we turned to run, but the way back was blocked. The tunnel we had come through had collapsed, and from the other passageways I could hear something. A whisper of movement, legs snapping on the stone, gutturals, grunts coming from the darkness. My flashlight flickered, and in those brief moments of darkness I saw something big move, something that disappeared as soon as the light returned. We clustered in the center of the room, back to back. The cracks in the glass deepened. The air became icy, the unbearable stench. What do we do? I sobbed. Sarah, that's when I noticed the paintings again. The sacrifices weren't worshipping the creatures, they were holding them back. The symbols, the crystal was a prison, and we had broken it. I think we need a sacrifice to seal it again. You murmur words to crush me. Jake looked at me in horror, or joking. But the crystal couldn't hold anymore. The creature inside was emerging. The shadows in the tunnels were moving faster. Chris looked at the paintings and then the creature. If we don't do this, we will all die. The debate lasted seconds. In the end, Sarah stepped forward. I will. The protests were useless. She forced us to form the circle. She took us by the hands and we started singing. I don't know how we knew what to say. The words came by themselves, as if someone whispered in our ear. When Sarah knelt the pillar, the glass stopped cracking. When the light enveloped her, the creature stopped in dry. When she screamed, everything turned black. We woke up at the entrance of the cave. Sarah had disappeared. The tunnels had completely collapsed. We didn't say anything to the police, who would believe us? But in my nightmares I hear her. I scream, and sometimes when I'm alone in the dark I feel something watching me, waiting for someone else to open the door again. The graffiti on the wall seemed to glow under the ace of my flashlight, forming a message that chilled my blood. Get out of here while you can. I turned to show the fine to my friends, but the words died in my throat when I realized that I was alone. Abandoned building that moments before had resonated with our laughter and nervous chatter was now plunged into absolute silence, and somewhere in the darkness I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching. It all started as a stupid challenge. It was a dull Saturday in our small town, and someone, I don't remember who, suggested exploring the factory, an old dilapidated building on the outskirts. The stories said it was haunted, that the ghosts of the workers killed in an accident decades ago still roamed its halls. We didn't believe in ghosts, but the thrill of exploring a forbidden place was too tempting. So after midnight sea of US, Jake, his girlfriend of mine Kai's, Sarah and I fell through a hole in the wire fence and entered the factory. The massive structure rose against the starry sky, its windows broken like dead eyes watching us. A shiver ran through us, my back. But when Jake made a joke about horror movie cliches, we all laughed, dissipating the tension. The inside of the factory was a maze of rusty machines and moo-covered walls. Our flashlights illuminated fragments of a forgotten past, faded motivational posters, old clocks, abandoned assembly lines. The more we give, invisible eyes riveted on us. I shook my head, trying to suppress the fear. It's just your imagination. Man, I said, there's no one here. How wrong I was. We kept exploring until we found the main office. Something was strange about that place. Unlike the rest of the building, which was covered in dust and cobwebs, everything here looked recent. There were fresh footprints on the floor, a half-full bottle of water on the desk. Guys, whispered mine, I think we're not alone. Before someone could answer, a door slammed shut in the distance, and then we heard several footsteps. They weren't ours, they weren't ghosts, they were real people, people who didn't want us to be there. Panic hit us immediately. We turned off our flashlights. The world turned to total darkness. I could hear the heavy breathing of my friends. We have to get out of here, Jake whispered, and we ran. The plan failed almost immediately. In the confusion we separated. I ran, aimlessly, dodging machines and rubble until I was done in an unknown hallway. It was there that I saw the warning message on the wall, and it was then, when I realized that I was alone and that someone else was in the building with me. The footsteps became stronger. They did not run. They approached calmly, as if they knew exactly where I was. I crushed myself against the wall, trying to make myself invisible. The footsteps stopped just a few meters away. An oppressive silence filled the air, and then a rough male voice was definitely not from any of my friends. I know you're here. My heart almost stopped. He was neither a security guard nor a bum. The tone was detached and methodical. Step outside. We mean you no harm. A deception. Though I couldn't see him, his insincere smile echoed in every syllable. I remained silent, my thoughts racing at full throttle. Whether it was late or early, I knew I had to stay there to discover myself. I moved, I held my breath and scurried millimeter. The sound of my own blood roared in my ears. Then an ace of a lantern crossed right in front of me. I dodged it at the last second, hiding behind an old rusty machine too close. "I found you," whispered the voice, and then I saw his face, a man of about 50 years old, weathered face, cold and calculating eyes, and the worst, I wasn't alone. Behind him, another man. He appeared in the half-light. They were both carrying knives. I ran, dodged the first man, and threw myself down the corridor, listening to the screams and footsteps behind me. My heart was pounding. I ran without knowing where I was going. I only had one goal: to get out, and then I saw him, a silver glow in the distance, a door ajar, the exit. I ran with all my strength, but when I reached out to open it, someone grabbed my arm. I turned, facing my captor, the first man. His face, inches from mine, reflected pure, contained violence. "You shouldn't have come here," he growled before he could answer. A scream echoed through the SAR building. She was still inside. The man looked in the direction of the scream. That second of distraction was my chance. I let go with all my might and pushed him. He staggered backwards. I opened the door with a jerk and ran away. At night I didn't stop. I crossed the dilapidated parking lot and went out through the hole in the fence. Only when I was a block away I dared to stop. I looked back, waiting to see my friends. I only saw the dark and silent factory. Sarah was still inside. I called 911. In the following minutes, the place was filled with sirens and red and blue lights. They found Jake, Mia, and Chris hiding in different parts of the building. But Sarah was never found. Weeks later, the police discovered the truth. The factory was not haunted. It was a center of human trafficking. A group of criminals used it as a base to kidnap unsuspecting young people. Sarah was one of its victims to this day. We don't know what happened to her, but every time I pass by where the factory was, I think I can still hear her scream in the darkness. The air in the apartment building felt heavy, charged with electricity that made my skin crawl as I climbed the stairs to the third floor. A sense of unease grew with each step. Something was wrong, but I couldn't pinpoint what it wasn't until I got to my door and saw the strange symbols carved into the wood that I understood. My neighbors weren't just eccentric. They were something much more sinister. Ever since I moved into the Rosewood apartments, I had noticed that my neighbors were peculiar. The rent was surprisingly affordable for New York, and the building, despite its age, it exuded a unique Art Deco allure. Following a tumultuous breakup and job loss, it was the best option available to me. Yet from the outset, I sensed that something was amiss. Mrs. Bernati from 3B consistently donned a heavy black veil, regardless of the sweltering summer heat. The 13-year-old twins remained confined to their apartment, yet I often caught snippets of their whispers in an unfamiliar language echoing through the night. Mr. Kovac, from 3AA, was another source of intrigue. I did my best to ignore the peculiar odors that occasionally seeped from beneath his door, chalking it up to the city's usual quirks. However, everything shifted when the odd occurrences began. Initially, they were minor disturbances, peculiar objects appearing in my apartment. They shifted positions while I was distracted by whispers in the hallway that ceased the moment I opened the door. A persistent sensation of being observed enveloped me, leading to nightmares filled with distorted figures and impossible shapes. I awoke gasping, drenched in sweat, haunted by the echo of otherworldly voices. I reassured myself it was merely stress, anxiety, any logical explanation, but deep down, I understood it was more than that. The day everything changed began like any other. I spent the morning distributing resumes throughout the city, attempting to shake off the unsettling feeling of being pursued. Upon returning home and ascending the stairs, the heaviness in the air intensified. Then I noticed the door. The symbols etched into the wood appeared to shift. As I focused on them, a faint glow radiated from the carvings, pulsing in sync with the rapid beat of my heart. The key with a single thought to go in and away from whatever was going on in the hallway, but before I could open the door I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned suddenly. It was Mrs. Bernati. For the first time she wore her veil up. Her face was wrong. Her eyes were completely black. "Time, my dear," she whispered, her voice resonating with something vast and indescribable. "We've waited for you a long time." Before the door opened on its own, hands grabbed me and dragged me inside, but it was no longer my apartment. The tiny studio had been transformed into a cavernous space. with walls covered in the same twisted symbols of the door. In the center of the room, a circle of hooded figures watched me. My neighbors. Mr. Kovac stepped forward, lowering his hood. His face no longer it was human. It looked like something out of the depths of the ocean. "Welcome, chosen," gurgling in a bubbling voice. "We've waited ages for your arrival." I tried to scream, but no sound came out of my throat. The twins began to sing in their alien language, their voices vibrating in the air. The room shuddered in the center of the circle. The air tore as if it were cloth. A portal opened through it. I saw a landscape impossible, a place where geometry and color followed no human logic, and something was coming through. A shiny black tentacle emerged, cousin then another, and another. Soon the room was filled with those twisted limbs, absorbing the light, devouring space. The being beyond the portal had too many eyes, too many mouths, and was hungry. One of its tentacles coiled around me. Something around interrupted the ritual, a loud and human cry of rage. "Let it go, spawn of Arltot." A man burst into the room wielding a sword of pure light, the superintendent of the building, Mr. Ramars. But he was not the middle-aged man with a prominent belly that I knew. He was younger, stronger, with eyes that shone with internal fire. The creature hesitated. The neighbors backed away when and groaning. Mr. Ramirez did not give them a chance. He launched himself to the attack, his sword cutting tentacles with ease. The inhuman being screamed a sound so terrible that I felt as if my brain was cracking. I fell to the free floor. At last Ramirez grabbed my arm. He ran. He shouted, "I will stop them." I didn't need them to repeat it to me. I ran out of the apartment, going down the stairs at full speed. The sounds of battle echoed behind me, the shrieks of monsters, the hum of the "with a sword of light," Ramirez's screams. I didn't stop until I was several streets away. When I finally looked back, the Rosewood apartments looked normal. Nothing came out of the windows. Nothing indicated the struggle I had just witnessed. For a fleeting moment, I questioned my own sanity. Yet the acrid scent clinging to my clothes and the tremors in my hands revealed the undeniable truth. I never returned to Rosewood. I escaped the city in search of the most mundane refuge I could find. Ignorance was no longer an option. I had glimpsed the darkness lurking behind the facade of our reality, and I understood that unspeakable terrors awaited just beyond. I can't fathom why I was selected, nor do I know if Ramirez made it out alive, or if I am truly safe. But one thing is certain. The next time you're apartment hunting, scrutinize your neighbors closely. You never know when that peculiar old lady might be the high priestess of an unnameable cult. And if you ever spot strange symbols etched into your door, flee, run as fast and as far as you can. Once you've been marked as the chosen one, the horrors that will pursue you are beyond comprehension.